The Ventaxian Empire's arrogant demands for tribute just signed their own death warrant, and Captain Michael Burns was about to make the delivery. When a mysterious alien megastructure started broadcasting the Ventaxian ultimatum across the stars, the Earth Space Fleet tasked Burns and his exploration vessel with investigating the signal's origin. Tracing it to the long-lost homeworld of the vanished Thule civilization, they arrived in the Thule Prime system to an astonishing sight. Millions of apparently inert spacecraft filled colossal orbiting drydocks, an ancient doomsday fleet predating even the Ventaxians by eons. Scanning the Ghost Armada's hulls, Burns noticed eerie similarities to mankind's own early ship designs. Could humans have visited the master builder Thule in the distant past, influencing their technology? Impossible as it seemed, the evidence mounted. Further scans revealed the purportedly dead ships were fully armed and operational underneath, as if the Thule left a secret weapon to defend their legacy. Then Burns's crew uncovered the smoking gun, data caches and hollow recordings left by human originators who shared their knowledge with the Thule millennia ago. The originators warned the Thule of a coming galactic war and provided designs for mighty ships and arms to weather the storm, but only if the Thule swore to secrecy and used them solely for self-defense. With dawning dread, Burns realized the Thule were wiped out by an unknown cataclysm soon after, but not before setting their failsafe to activate and name humanity their successors at the first sign of outside aggression, like the Ventaxian signal. Now Burns faces an impossible choice: reawaken the Ghost Fleet to shield Earth from conquest and defy Ventaxian hegemony, or pin mankind's fate on the knife's edge of diplomacy. As tribute demands grow more belligerent by the day, the destiny of the human race and the galaxy rests on Burns' next move, an interstellar Cold War between superpowers ignited by a 10,000-year-old secret powder keg, one that threatens to soon explode into a fight for survival. The tension on the bridge was palpable as Burns and his officers argued back and forth. Lieutenant Samir Singh, the tactical officer, smacked his palm on the console. "We can't just sit on our hands while the Ventaxians prepare for war. The Thule fleet is our best chance to defend Earth." Navigator Ella Novak shook her head. "But at what cost? If we bring those ships online, it could spark an arms race that engulfs the whole galaxy. We'd be responsible for the fallout." Burns held up a hand, silencing the debate. "Enough, I'm contacting Alliance Command. They need to weigh in on this." He strode to the comm station and hailed Earth on a secure channel. For the next several hours, Burns laid out the situation to the admirals and diplomats, outlining the potential risks and rewards. In the end, their orders were clear: stall for time and let negotiations play out. Burns chafed at the restrictions but relayed the commands to his crew. As the diplomatic back and forth dragged on with no resolution in sight, a klaxon suddenly blared through the ship. "Captain, Ventaxian warship dropping out of hyperspace," Singh yelled. "They're charging weapons." The deck shuddered violently as the hostile craft opened fire, lancing Burns' ship with blistering energy beams. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and crewmen were thrown to the floor as the barrage pummeled the hull. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the assault ceased. The Ventaxian ship broke off and fled, disappearing back into hyperspace. Burns picked himself up, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Damage report." "Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5, shields down to 20%, Novak responded, coughing through the acrid smoke filling the bridge. "A few more hits, and they'd have cracked us open." "That was no full attack," Singh growled. "More like a probe. I'd bet my stripes they were testing our capabilities." Apoplectic with rage, Burns punched up Alliance Command again. "Did you get all that? The Ventaxians just shot at us unprovoked. To hell with diplomacy, we need to get the Thule fleet up and running yesterday." After a tense back and forth, he finally got the authorization he needed. If the Ventaxians made any further moves, Earth would consider it an act of war. They were cleared to bring the Ghost Armada online. Burns and his crew worked around the clock to decipher the originator's cryptic activation protocols. Cracking the ancient codes taxed the ship's computers to their limits. But finally, with a hum that seemed to resonate in their bones, the massive Thule mothership came to life. Lights flickered on across its kilometers-long hull, and ancient engines rumbled to full power. On the bridge, Burns nodded to Singh, broadcast on all frequencies. The lieutenant complied, and Burns spoke in a voice as hard as steel. "To the Ventaxian Empire, this is Captain Michael Burns of the Earth Space Fleet, transmitting from the Thule mothership. Your unprovoked attack on my vessel was an act of war, so I've got a message for you. Back off or there will be consequences. The human race is not to be trifled with. If you doubt our strength, take a good look at the fleet we just brought online. Attack us again, and you'll find out what it can do." Burns out. In the wake of his ultimatum, a tense quiet settled over Thule Prime. The Ventaxian ships massed at the border but held position, clearly rattled by the spectre of the Thule armada. Neither side seemed eager to make the first move, knowing the next could mean galactic war. As Burns and his crew prepared to transfer to the mothership and take the fight to the enemy if necessary, an incoming hail surprised them. The ID code was Ventaxian, but not from their main fleet. Burns stared at the display, brow furrowed. It's from an admiral, but on an encrypted back channel. Warily, he ordered the message through. The wizened, grey-skinned face of a Ventaxian flag officer appeared on the screen. "Captain Burns," the alien said in clipped, accented English, "I am Admiral Zekrin of the Imperial Navy. I must speak with you most urgently." "If you're calling to demand our surrender, you can forget it," Burns snapped. "We won't be intimidated by your bullying." Zekrin held up a placating hand. "No, Captain, you misunderstand. I represent certain moderate factions within the Empire. We believe the attack on your ship was unsanctioned, carried out by hawkish elements without approval. We seek to avoid war." Burns narrowed his eyes, sensing a trap. The Admiral continued hurriedly. "Time is short. I propose a meeting on neutral ground to discuss a mutual stand-down, a way to end this crisis without further bloodshed." Every instinct screamed at Burns to refuse, but the slightest chance at a peaceful solution, could he really pass that up? Gritting his teeth, he gave a curt nod. "Send the coordinates. I'll come alone. But if this is a trick—" "No tricks," Zekrin assured. "You have my word." The transmission ended. "We have to buy time," Burns insisted. "The fleet's not fully operational yet. If the worst happens, you'll carry on without me and defend Earth." Novak grabbed his arm as he turned to go. "Mike, I have a bad feeling about this." Burns took a nondescript shuttle, leaving Singh in command with orders to ready the fleet. The coordinates Zekrin sent guided him to a seedy, run-down space station in the no-man's land between borders, neutral territory. He docked and, checking his sidearm, stepped into the dimly lit corridor. The meeting spot was a dingy back room, shadows clinging to every corner. Burns squinted as his eyes adjusted and stiffened in shock. The figure silhouetted against the far wall was no Ventaxian. It was bipedal, humanoid, but of no species Burns recognized. "Captain Burns," the stranger said, inclining his head, "thank you for coming. I imagine you have questions." "Who the hell are you?" Burns demanded, hand drifting toward his gun. "What game are you playing?" The alien stepped into the light. Burns saw grey skin, black eyes, an expressionless face that could have been carved from stone. "You may call me an emissary," the stranger said calmly, "of certain interested parties. The Ventaxians are not aware of my presence. I assure you, I mean you no harm." Wary but sensing no immediate threat, Burns let his hand fall to his side. "Say your piece, then." "I'm here to warn you, Captain. Thule Prime and its armada, they are far more than what they appear, and the fate of the originators, well, let us say there is much you do not yet understand." The emissary paced the room, hands clasped behind his back. "There are forces at work here beyond your reckoning, an ancient conspiracy, secrets buried long ago. The true history of this galaxy has been hidden from you." Growing irritated, Burns shook his head. "Enough riddles. You clearly know something. Spit it out. The alien fixed him with a penetrating stare. The originators never intended for their weapons to be used. They knew the danger of destabilizing the balance of power. I am here to urge you, with the utmost sincerity, do not awaken that fleet. Forget what you found, leave Thule Prime and never return. You can and you must, the emissary pressed. Heed my warning, walk away, bury the past, because I promise you this. If humanity meddles further in affairs beyond its understanding, you will suffer the same doom as the originators and Thule before you. Is that a threat? Burns growled. The emissary shook his head, something almost like sorrow flickering across his impassive face. A warning, from those who would spare you their fate. Burns opened his mouth to argue further, when a blaring alarm tore through the station. He slapped his comm badge. Burns to shuttle, report! But the alien was already gone, vanished like a wisp of smoke. Burns swore and sprinted for the hangar, pulse pounding. If he couldn't get back to his ship, if the Ventaxians attacked in force... He heard the rumble of guns and scream of rending metal before he even made the door. Staggering into the hangar, he beheld a scene of utter devastation. The Ventaxians had torn the station apart. Debris was everywhere, small fires burning uncontrolled. His shuttle, his only way out, was a blasted blackened husk. Burns swayed against the bulkhead, stomach plummeting into his boots. As if in cruel mockery, his communicator crackled to life one final time. Singh's panicked voice rang tinnily in his ears. Static swallowed his words. Numb, Burns bowed his head. He had failed his ship, his crew, his entire species, and now they would all pay the price. Burns's world exploded into chaos as the first Ventaxian warship dropped out of hyperspace, its weapons already charging. The space station rocked violently as energy beams slammed into its hull. Alarms blared and emergency lights flashed. Shit! Burns spun to face the emissary, but the alien's form shimmered and changed. Where the grey-skinned stranger had stood moments before, a Ventaxian officer now sneered at him. You humans are so predictable, the impostor taunted, always rushing to play the hero. Burns lunged for his sidearm, but the Ventaxian was faster. A stun blast caught Burns in the chest, sending him crashing to the floor. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, he heard the alien's parting words. Nothing personal, Captain, but war is good for business. Burns to shuttle, emergency extraction. Only Static answered. The Ventaxians were jamming all frequencies. With no other options, Burns sprinted for the reactor core. If he could overload it, the resulting explosion might blow out the docking clamps. It was a long shot, but his only chance. He raced through smoke-filled corridors, dodging panicked civilians and debris. The reactor room was chaos, technicians frantically trying to stabilize the core as warning klaxons shrieked. Everybody out, he bellowed. This whole place is about to blow. As the last stragglers fled, Burns ran for his shuttle. The deck plates beneath his feet grew hot. He could hear the reactor's ominous whine building to a crescendo. Burns flung himself into the pilot's seat just as a massive explosion rocked the station. The docking clamps blew free, and his shuttle tumbled into space. Through the view screen, he watched the station tear itself apart in a brilliant fireball. No time to catch his breath. Ventaxian fighters were already moving to intercept. Burns threw the shuttle into a wild series of evasive maneuvers, jinking and weaving through debris fields as energy beams lanced past. On his ship, Lieutenant Singh agonized over the decision to retreat. But with communications jammed and the captain MIA, he had no choice. They fell back to Thule Prime's orbit, praying Burns would find a way to reach them. As Ventaxian capital ships closed in for the kill, Singh barked orders to finish activating the Ghost Fleet. I don't care if the protocols aren't fully decrypted, he snapped. Burns' standing orders were clear. Get those ships online now. Just when all seemed lost, the ancient Thule Armada stirred to life. Vast motherships and countless smaller craft powered up, their running lights piercing the darkness of space. As one, they moved to engage the Ventaxian fleet. The Ventaxians recoiled in shock at the sheer scale of the defenders arrayed against them. For a moment, space was silent. Then all hell broke loose. Energy beams crisscrossed the void. Missiles streaked between the warring fleets. Smaller craft dueled at point-blank range, their weapons' fire illuminating the eternal night. In the midst of this chaos, Burns's battered shuttle limped towards Thule Prime. He white-knuckled the controls, juking to avoid stray shots and debris. A spread of missiles forced him into a bone-jarring dive. He pulled up at the last second, skimming the surface of a Thule cruiser. "Come on," Burns muttered. The mothership's docking bay loomed ahead. He nursed every ounce of thrust from his failing engines. With a bone-rattling impact, the shuttle crashed onto the deck. Burns staggered out, bruised but alive. He sprinted for the bridge, shouting orders as he ran. Zeng's relief was palpable. "Sir, we've got the Thule fleet online, but we're taking heavy fire. Ventaxian formations are—" "On screen," Burns ordered, settling into the captain's chair. He studied the tactical display, mind racing. "Concentrate fire on their flagship. All batteries. Maximum yield." The Thule ships responded instantly to his commands. Converging beams of energy slammed into the Ventaxian dreadnought. Its shields flared and died under the onslaught. Secondary explosions rippled along its hull. "Press the attack," Burns shouted. "Don't let up." Hopelessly outmatched, the Ventaxian fleet began to break apart. Burns seized the advantage, deploying wings of Thule fighters to harass their retreat. He ordered long-range strikes against Ventaxian outposts and supply depots along the frontier. As the battle raged, a cloaked ship slipped away unnoticed. The false emissary observed the carnage with cold detachment. His part in this opening move was done. The real game was only beginning. Hours later, Alliance reinforcements arrived to find the Ventaxians in full retreat. Human and Thule ships moved in concert, seizing control of key systems and pushing deeper into enemy territory. But even as they celebrated their victory, Burns couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. Who was that strange emissary? What were his true motives? And what secrets still lurked in the depths of Thule Prime? For now, those mysteries would have to wait. The Ventaxians would regroup and strike back. Of that, Burns had no doubt. He had to be ready. As his fleet consolidated their gains, Burns knew the real war was only just beginning. The dust had barely settled from their initial victory when Captain Burns called his senior staff to the Thule mothership's war room. Holograms flickered to life, displaying the vast swaths of Ventaxian territory now vulnerable to attack. "We've bloodied their nose," Burns said, his voice grim. "But make no mistake, the Ventaxians will regroup. We need to press our advantage before they can mass their full strength." Admiral Chen, the Alliance fleet commander, nodded in agreement. "Our intelligence suggests their industrial capacity is concentrated in these fringe systems." She gestured, highlighting a cluster of star systems. "If we can cripple their ability to repair and resupply, we force them into a decisive battle on our terms," Burns finished. "Exactly." Over the next several days, the Thule Armada struck like lightning. Sleek warships dropped out of hyperspace, their ancient weapons systems humming with power that put modern technology to shame. On the bridge of the lead battlecruiser, Burns watched as brilliant lances of phased plasma fire lashed out, slicing through Ventaxian orbital defense platforms with minimal resistance. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "Ventaxian shipyards in the Proxima system have been neutralized. Their shields couldn't withstand our firepower." Burns nodded grimly. "Bring us about. Next target, their fuel processing facilities in the Deneb sector." System after system fell to the Thule onslaught. Vital Ventaxian military installations were reduced to irradiated rubble. Supply depots burned. Sensor arrays went dark. The Ventaxians scrambled to mount a defense, but their ships were hopelessly outclassed. Their energy weapons splashed harmlessly against Thule shields. Their missiles were swatted from the sky by point defense grids of unparalleled precision. Admiral Zarketh, Supreme Commander of the Ventaxian fleet, snarled in frustration as another status report came in. 2 more systems lost? Impossible. His aide cowered before him. The human weapons, nothing in our arsenal can stand against them, my lord. Zeotaketh's fist slammed down on his command chair. Then we change the game. Prepare my personal battle group. We strike at the heart of their power, Thule Prime itself. But Captain Burns had anticipated just such an audacious attempt. As the Ventaxian strike force dropped out of hyperspace on approach to Thule Prime, they found themselves surrounded. Cloaked Thule frigates decloaked, mines detonated, and withering fire poured in from all sides. Zarketh's command ship was crippled in seconds, venting atmosphere and trailing debris as it limped away. The remainder of his task force scattered, easy prey for Burns' pursuing battle group. With their counter-attack crushed, the Ventaxians fell back to their most heavily fortified core systems. Massive planetary defense grids and asteroid-based weapon platforms formed a dripping perimeter around their last bastions of power. In his war room deep within the Ventaxian capital, the Empire's shadowy ruler seethed with rage. Holograms displayed the extent of territory lost to the accursed humans and their Thule allies. "Silence," the Ventaxian leader hissed. "I will not be remembered as the one who surrendered to primitives. No, we have one final card to play." He turned to his most trusted operative, a battle-scarred commando. "Assemble your best teams, your target, Thule Prime itself. Destroy whatever gives them control over that fleet, by any means necessary." As the Thule armada massed for what promised to be the decisive assault on the Ventaxian stronghold, Burns allowed himself a moment of cautious optimism. Victory seemed within reach at last. But even as he finalized his attack plans, disaster struck. Alarms blared throughout Thule Prime. Burns sprinted to the command center, his blood running cold as he saw the security feeds. Somehow, Ventaxian commandos had penetrated the mothership's defenses. They were fighting their way towards the neural core that controlled the entire Thule fleet. Burns grabbed his sidearm, barking orders as he ran. "All security teams to the control nexus. We cannot let them reach that core." The fate of the war, and perhaps humanity itself, now hung by a thread. The Thule fleet, poised for its decisive strike against the Ventaxian stronghold, suddenly found itself in disarray. A frantic transmission crackled through the command channels. Burns' blood ran cold. He barked orders to his bridge crew. "Set course for Thule Prime, maximum thrust." As the ship hurtled through space, Burns and his security team geared up. The moment they docked, they sprinted towards the fortified staging ground. Corridors echoed with the sounds of battle, energy weapons discharging, metal screeching, and the whir of Thule sentry drones. They burst into the central core, greeted by chaos. Ventaxian commandos, sleek in their black combat suits, fought viciously against the automated defenses. Sparks flew as energy bolts ricocheted off walls. The acrid stench of ozone filled the air. Burns ducked behind a fallen console, his team fanning out around him. "How the hell did they get in here?" he shouted over the din. A nearby technician, face streaked with grime, shouted back, "They blinded our sensors. Some kind of advanced hacking suite slipped right through during those earlier attacks." The ship's AI's voice cut through the cacophony, its usual calm tinged with urgency. "Captain Burns, the Ventaxians are attempting to access our data logs. If they overwrite the activation codes for the fleet's command network—" "I know," Burns growled, popping up to fire a burst at an advancing commando. "We lose control of the Ghost Fleet." He watched a Marine go down, chest smoking from a direct hit. The Ventaxians pressed forward, their fanatical dedication evident in every move. Burns' team fought back fiercely. They managed to push the initial wave back, sealing off sections of the control hub. But it wasn't over. More Ventaxian commandos kept appearing, teleporting in through hijacked transporter nodes. As Burns directed his forces to shore up defenses around critical systems, a chilling report came in. "Sir, the Ventaxians have hostages, a group of archaeologists studying the Thule databanks." Burns cursed. He couldn't risk those scientists, but if the Ventaxians succeeded, he made a gut-wrenching choice. "Seal off sections A through D," he ordered. "Prepare to vent to space." His second-in-command paled. "Sir, the hostages—" "Do it," Burns snapped. He activated the ship-wide comm. "Attention, Ventaxian forces. You have 10 seconds to surrender your hostages before we vent the compromised sections to space." 10 seconds ticked by. Finally, the Ventaxian commander's voice crackled over the comm. "We're coming out, don't shoot." Burns watched warily as the surviving commandos emerged, hands raised. The hostages stumbled forward, pale but alive. Suddenly alarms blared. A rogue Ventaxian had triggered hidden explosives. The ship rocked violently as a plasma conduit ruptured. Burns' mind raced. There was only one option left. Initiate primary hull separation. Reroute all power to the drive sections. The ship groaned as its forward sections were jettisoned. Burns felt the deck lurch beneath his feet as the remaining engines struggled to move the crippled vessel. "Sir, we're barely at sublight speed," his helmsman reported. "Secondary containment fields are failing." Burns' teeth clenched. "Set course away from the fleet, maximum distance. Seal the control core in every redundant bulkhead we've got left." As radiation alarms shrieked throughout the ship, Burns stared out at the stars. They'd survived barely. But at what cost? And what would become of the fleet, now left without its command ship as it faced the entrenched Ventaxian forces? The bridge of Burns's vessel shuddered as the Thule Prime mothership drifted away, its reactor core pulsing with unstable energy. Klaxons blared as radiation levels spiked. Lieutenant Chen's fingers flew across the navigation console. The ship lurched as its engines fired, executing a complex series of burns and attitude adjustments. Through the view screen, Burns watched the expanding cloud of radioactive debris recede. "Sir, we're clear of the radiation field," Chen reported, sweat beading on his brow. "Holding position at designated rendezvous coordinates." Burns nodded, then turned to his communications officer. "Broadcast the regroup signal to all Thule vessels. We need to establish a new command structure fast." As the crew worked feverishly, Burns input his personal override codes into the command console. The ship's computer chirped, acknowledging the input. "Uplink established," the AI announced. "Thule command network awaiting authorization." Burns took a deep breath, then spoke clearly. "This is Captain Michael Burns, authorization code, Theta 97 Echo Tango, initiate emergency command transfer protocol." For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the main display flickered, filling with streams of alien data, as the ancient Thule systems verified Burns' credentials. "Command authority accepted," the AI confirmed. "You now have full tactical control of the Thule Armada." Burns allowed himself a brief sigh of relief before turning to his tactical officer. "Status of the fleet?" "Thule vessels responding to new command protocols, sir," Lieutenant Reyes reported. "Uploading revised targeting data now." The tactical display came alive with friendly icons as the Ghost Fleet reoriented itself. In the distance, Burns saw flashes of light as Alliance reinforcements dropped out of hyperspace, moving to shore up their defensive line. "We can't give the Ventaxians time to regroup," Burns said, studying the tactical overlay. "Lieutenant Reyes, designate Stealth Squadrons Sigma and Omega for immediate deployment. I want hit-and-run attacks on these targets." He highlighted a series of Ventaxian outposts and supply depots. As Reyes relayed the orders, Burns turned to his XO. "Commander Singh, have the main battle groups form up on us. We're going to punch straight through their inner defenses while they're scrambling to respond." Singh nodded grimly. "ISA concentrated alpha strike on their core systems." The bridge hummed with activity as Burns's crew coordinated the massive assault. On the main view screen, streams of data showed Thule stealth ships slipping past Ventaxian patrols, striking at vulnerable targets. Alarms blared as the first wave of return fire washed over their shields. Burns leaned forward, eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Push forward! Don't let up!" The space around them lit up with weapons fire as the massed Thule fleet engaged the Ventaxian defenders. Burns watched as his spearhead formation drove relentlessly toward a critical choke point. a string of fortified planetoids guarding the approach to the enemy's inner sanctum. "Sir," Reyes called out, "we've breached their outer perimeter, establishing foothold in System X-117. Burns nodded grimly. They'd seized the narrow opening they needed, but the real battle was just beginning. Already he could see Ventaxian reserve fleets moving to plug the gap. "All ships, press the attack," Burns ordered. "We need to secure those way station choke points before they can reinforce." The conflict intensified as both sides committed their heaviest units to the fray. Burns watched in awe as titanic Thule dreadnoughts, weapons platforms the size of small moons, lumbered into position. Facing them was a monstrosity of Ventaxian engineering. A Leviathan-class interdictor, wreathed in a shimmering cloud of spores that seemed to devour incoming fire. "Target that behemoth," Burns ordered. "All available firepower." The space between the fleets vanished in a hellstorm of energy discharges and antimatter detonations. Burns's vessel rocked violently as stray shots impacted their shields. For agonizing minutes, neither side seemed to gain the upper hand. Then finally a gap appeared in the Ventaxian ship's defenses. "There," Burns shouted. "Concentrate fire on that weak point." Burns' finger hovered over the firing control, ready to deliver the killing blow to the Ventaxian Leviathan. Suddenly, a priority alert flashed across his command console. He swiped it open, his eyes widening as he processed the incoming data. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen called out, his voice tight with urgency. "Long-range sensors detect a massive warp signature approaching. It's not one of ours." Burns's stomach dropped. He pulled up the sensor data, watching as the telemetry commitment into a chilling picture. A vast armada of Ventaxian ships, easily rivaling their own fleet in size and firepower, was bearing down on their position at maximum warp. "Patch me through to Alliance Command," Burns ordered, his mind racing. As the connection established, he found himself facing a panel of grim-faced admirals. "Captain Burns," one began, her voice strained, "you've seen the sensor data. We're ordering an immediate tactical retreat. Fall back to—" Burns cut her off. "With respect, Admiral, if we retreat now, we lose everything we've fought for. The Ventaxians will regroup and we'll be right back where we started." "I know about the coup cache," Burns interrupted, his jaw clenching, "and I know what their dimensional rift lances can do, but we have one advantage they don't: the Thule Ghost Fleet." He turned to his tactical officer. "Lieutenant Reyes, pull up the system map. Focus on the asteroid belt." As the holographic display flickered to life, Burns outlined his plan. The admirals listened, their expressions a mix of disbelief and grudging admiration. "It's insane," one finally said, "but it might be our only shot." Burns nodded grimly. "Then let's do this." He turned to his crew, his voice carrying across the bridge. "All hands, battle stations. Helm, plot a course to these coordinates." He transmitted the data with a swipe of his hand. The ship's engines thrummed to life as they accelerated towards the system's sprawling asteroid belt. Behind them, the rest of the Thule fleet fell into formation. Burns watched the tactical display, his heart pounding as the Ventaxian reinforcements dropped out of warp. A sea of red icons flooded the screen, dwarfing their own forces. "Sir," Reyes reported, "enemy fighters incoming." Burns nodded. "Execute primary assault plan. Target those asteroids." The space around them lit up as the Thule ships unleashed their fury. But instead of striking the approaching Ventaxian fleet, their weapons tore into the dense field of asteroids and ice. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The concentrated firepower shattered the cosmic debris, setting off a chain reaction that spread through the belt like wildfire. Chunks of rock and ice, superheated by weapons fire, hurtled towards the Ventaxian fleet. On the main view screen, Burns watched as the artificial meteor storm slammed into the enemy formation. Even the mighty coup cache dreadnoughts, with their vaunted defenses, buckled under the onslaught. Shields flared and failed, armor plating crumpled smoothly under the relentless barrage. "Keep firing," Burns shouted. "Don't let up." As the Ventaxian fleet reeled, trapped in the deadly debris field, Burns knew it was time for the final play. He input a series of complex codes into his command console, authorizing the ultimate contingency left by the Thule originators. The effect was instantaneous. The Thule ships seemed to come alive, their movements becoming more fluid, more coordinated. No longer mere vessels, they had transformed into a single, vast intelligence with one purpose, the utter annihilation of their foes. Burns watched in awe as the Thule dreadnoughts accelerated, plunging into the heart of the conflagration. Their warp cores pulsed with energy, building to a crescendo. The space around them warped and twisted as the Thule ships detonated in a carefully orchestrated sequence. Each explosion spawned a miniature black hole, tearing apart everything in its vicinity before collapsing in on itself. The Ventaxian fleet, already battered by the meteor storm, stood no chance. Ships were ripped apart at the molecular level, their matter scattered across dimensions. The dreaded Kukash dreadnoughts, for all their fearsome weaponry, vanished in the blink of an eye. In mere moments it was over. Where the mighty Ventaxian armada had been, there was now only empty space and scattered debris. The path to the Ventaxian core worlds lay open. Burns wasted no time. "All ships, form up on me," he ordered. "We're punching straight through to their homeworld." The remnants of the Thule Ghost Fleet surged forward, their gleaming hulls still crackling with energy from the dimensional rifts. Human vessels fell in behind, a ragtag armada united in purpose. As they approached the Ventaxian home system, Burns studied the tactical display. The enemy's outer defenses were in disarray, their command structure shattered by the loss of the noble houses. "Sir," Lieutenant Reyes reported, "we're detecting widespread comm chatter among Ventaxian forces. It's chaos out there." Burns nodded grimly. "Press the advantage, all ships weapons free." The space around them erupted in a storm of energy weapons and missile salvos. Ventaxian ships, caught off guard and leaderless, fell before the onslaught. Those that didn't outright surrender engaged in uncoordinated, desperate attacks. As they pushed deeper into the system, Burns directed the fleet with cold precision. "Concentrate fire on those defense platforms," he ordered, highlighting a string of orbital fortresses. The Thule dreadnoughts responded, their ancient weapons tearing through Ventaxian shields without effort. One by one the platforms went dark, leaving the path to the capital world clear. "Captain," Commander Singh called out, "Alliance ground forces are ready for deployment." Burns studied the planet below, its surface a maze of heavily fortified cities and military installations. "Begin landings in sectors Alpha through Delta," he ordered. "I want boots on the ground within the hour." As troop transports streamed towards the Ventaxian homeworld, Burns turned his attention to the wider system. "Establish a blockade perimeter," he instructed. "No ships in or out without our say-so." The fleet spread out, forming an impenetrable cordon around the besieged planet. Burns watched as the last fragments of organized Ventaxian resistance crumbled. Suddenly, an alert flashed on his console. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen reported, "we're receiving a priority transmission. It's from the rogue Ventaxian operative we encountered before." Burns frowned, remembering the enigmatic figure who had first alerted them to the Thule fleet's existence. "Put it through," he ordered. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a hooded figure. "Captain Burns," the operative said, his voice distorted, "I offer unconditional surrender in exchange for a ceasefire and safe passage off-world." Burns's eyes narrowed. "And why should I trust you?" Burns weighed his options, acutely aware of the lives hanging in the balance. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, we'll meet on neutral ground, the orbital station at these coordinates." As the transmission cut off, Burns turned to his XO. "Commander Singh, you have the bridge. I'm going to meet our mystery guest." Hours later, Burns stood in the sterile confines of the orbital station, flanked by Thule guards. The airlock cycled open, revealing the hooded operative. "Well," Burns said, his hand resting on his sidearm, "let's see who we're really dealing with." The figure reached up, pulling back his hood. Burns's jaw dropped as he recognized the face beneath, the supreme overlord of the Ventaxian Empire himself. "A surprised, Captain," the Overlord asked, a sardonic smile playing across his alien features. "I must admit you've exceeded even my wildest expectations." Burns's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. You planned this?" The Overlord nodded. "A calculated risk, but one that paid off spectacularly. Thanks to you, my troublesome noble houses have been eliminated. I now stand unchallenged at the helm of what remains of my empire." "You used us," Burns growled, his hand tightening on his weapon. "I prefer to think of it as a mutually beneficial arrangement," the Overlord replied smoothly. "And speaking of arrangements, I have a proposal for you, Captain Burns." The alien ruler outlined his audacious plan, a joint imperium, with Burns and himself as co-sovereigns, backed by the might of the Thule fleet. Burns listened, torn between disbelief and a grudging admiration for the Overlord's cunning. "And if I refuse?" he asked. The Overlord shrugged. "Then we continue this pointless bloodshed, grinding each other down until there's nothing left to rule. Is that truly what you want, Captain?" Burns closed his eyes, weighing the lives that hung in the balance against the Overlord's naked power grab. Finally he spoke. "I'll consider your proposal, but on one condition. Any new galactic order must uphold the principles of democracy, sovereignty, and sentient rights." The Overlord nodded, extending a clawed hand. "Then let us begin hammering out the details of our new compact, partner." As Burns reluctantly shook the alien's hand, alarms blared throughout the station. Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the comm. "Captain, long-range sensors are picking up a massive fleet approaching at high warp. Sir, the readings, they match the Thule ships." Burns and the Overlord locked eyes, their newfound alliance already facing its first test, the station's viewports filled with the ominous silhouettes of a vast armada, a second doomsday fleet emerging from the depths of space. Burns and the Ventaxian Overlord stood frozen, their tentative alliance forgotten as they stared at the viewscreen. The space beyond the station swarmed with ships, their sleek forms identical to the Thule vessels Burns had just used to devastate the Ventaxian fleet. "What treachery is this?" the Overlord hissed, his claws flexing. Burns shook his head, eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Not treachery. Look at those energy signatures. They're a perfect match for our Thule ships." He tapped his comm badge. "Burns to fleet, all vessels, defensive formation Delta. Human reinforcements, stand ready." As his ships maneuvered into position, a priority alert flashed across the command console. Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled through the speakers. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's using an archaic protocol. Our linguists say it's in first tongue." Burns exchanged a glance with the Overlord. "Put it through." The viewscreen flickered, resolving into an image that made both leaders step back. A shimmering, multifaceted construct hovered before them, its form constantly shifting and realigning. "Greetings, Captain Burns. Greetings, Overlord of the Ventaxians. We are the Archilect Secrans." The voice reverberated through the station, each word carrying the weight of eons. Burns leaned forward, his voice steady. "Identify yourselves." The construct pulsed. "We are the last bastion of the Thule civilization. For millennia we have watched, waiting for the moment our contingencies would be needed." As the Cycrans spoke, Burns felt a chill run down his spine. They revealed the true history of the Thule, a tragic tale of genocide at the hands of an ancient, implacable foe known as the Molalth Collective. "Before their extermination, our creators encoded their entire civilization within us," the Cycrans continued. "We are their legacy, their last hope." The Overlord stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. "And what do you want from us?" The construct's form shimmered, its voice hardening. "We have observed the power you've unleashed, Captain Burns. The Thule artifacts under your control must be returned to us immediately. We demand total authority over all Thule technology and complete fealty from your forces." Burns tensed, acutely aware of the firepower arrayed against them. "And if we refuse?" "Then we will take what is ours by force," the Cycrans replied coolly. The Overlord snarled, but Burns held up a hand. "Let's not be hasty. Perhaps we can reach an agreement that benefits all parties." For hours Burns negotiated, his mind racing as he processed the staggering revelations. The Cycron's warnings of the Molal threat hung over every word, a spectre of cosmic horror that made their current conflicts seem petty in comparison. Finally, a fragile accord was reached, a temporary non-aggression pact, buying time for all sides to assess the situation. As the transmission ended, Burns turned to the Overlord. "Well, it seems our plans for galactic domination may need some revision." The alien ruler nodded grimly. "Indeed, but make no mistake, human, this changes nothing between us. We merely face a common threat." Burns watched as the Overlord stalked away, then gazed out at the vast armada surrounding them. In the depths of space, something ancient and terrible stirred, a force that made even the mighty Thule tremble. The true battle, Burns realized, was just beginning. The uneasy alliance between Burns, the Ventaxian Overlord, and the Archelect Cycrons shattered as alarms blared throughout the station. Burns watched the main view screen, his stomach churning as vast, otherworldly structures materialized in the void of deep space. "What in God's name are those?" he breathed, leaning forward for a closer look. Before Burns could respond, the AI construct vanished, leaving him alone with the Ventaxian Overlord. The alien ruler's eyes narrowed, his claws flexing nervously. "It seems our petty squabbles are about to become irrelevant, human," the Overlord hissed. Burns nodded grimly, his mind racing. He opened a channel to his fleet. "All ships, battle stations, we have a code black scenario." As Burns barked orders, coordinating with what remained of the human and Ventaxian forces, the vast Thule armada surged into action. Thousands of ancient warships, their hulls gleaming with eldritch energies, formed up in intricate defensive patterns. Reports flooded in from across the sector. Entire colonies went dark in an instant, their signals cut off mid-transmission. Burns stared at the tactical display, watching as system after system winked out of existence. "Sir," Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the comm, "we're receiving distress calls from Outpost Sigma. They're under attack." Burns clenched his fists. On screen. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a scene of utter chaos. Vast geometric shapes swarmed through the outpost's defense grid, tearing through reinforced armor smoothly. As Burns watched, a massive harvester drone latched onto a habitat module, its surface rippling with strange energies. In seconds, the module simply ceased to exist, its very atoms disassembled and absorbed into the drone's form. "Get me, Cycrons," Burns snapped. The AI construct reappeared, its form noticeably more agitated. "We are engaging the enemy on multiple fronts, Captain Burns. Our resources are stretched thin." Burns leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "We need to coordinate our efforts. My ships can provide cover while your dreadnoughts—" "Negative," Cycrons interrupted. "The situation is far more dire than you realize. We are enacting emergency protocols." Before Burns could protest, the view screen lit up with a blinding flash. Vast swathes of space warped and twisted as entire Thule battle groups detonated in carefully orchestrated sequences. Reality itself seemed to rupture, layers of space-time peeling away like onion skin. For a moment it seemed to work. The harvester advance slowed, their endless ranks faltering in the face of such cosmic devastation. But then, impossibly, they began to adapt. Trillions of drones sacrificed themselves, their bodies forming living shields against the reality-warping energies. Burns watched in horror as the harvesters pressed on, undaunted by losses that would have annihilated any other force in the galaxy. He turned to his tactical officer. "Status report on the evacuation efforts." "Not good, sir," came the grim reply. "We've only managed to get about 30% of the colonial population to safety. The rest—" Burns closed his eyes, the weight of billions of lives pressing down on him. When he opened them again, there was a cold fury burning in their depths. As his crew scrambled to carry out his orders, Burns turned to the Ventaxian Overlord. I hope you're ready for one last dance, Your Majesty, because if this doesn't work, there won't be a galaxy left to rule." The alien ruler nodded grimly, all pretense of hostility forgotten in the face of annihilation. Together they strode towards the hangar bay, ready to make their final stand against the implacable hunger of the Molalth Collective. The Thule Prime mothership shuddered as the Harvester assault reached its reactor core. Burns gripped the command console, his squeezing hard. Alarms blared across the bridge as energy readings spiked off the charts. "Reactor breach imminent," Lieutenant Chen shouted over the cacophony. Burns opened his mouth to order an evacuation, but his words were drowned out by a deafening roar. The ship's hull vibrated, ancient frequencies awakening within its very structure. A blinding flash erupted from the reactor chamber, engulfing the bridge in searing light. As Burns's vision cleared, he saw the impossible unfolding before him. A colossal wave of energy radiated outward, tearing through space itself. The Harvester ships in its path twisted and warped, their higher-dimensional defenses crumbling seamlessly. "My God," the Ventaxian overlord whispered, his alien features contorted in awe and terror. The distortion wave slammed into the Molalth command structure. Burns watched on the tactical display as the hive mind's intricate network of relays and control nodes blinked out of existence one by one. Suddenly, the Harvester fleet's coordinated assault faltered. Individual ships broke formation, their movements erratic and disjointed. Burns leaned forward, hope rising in his chest. "They're retreating," Chen exclaimed. But the victory was short-lived. The energy wave continued to expand, growing more unstable with each passing second. Burns's hope turned to horror as he realized the true scope of what they'd unleashed. "All ships, full reverse thrust," he barked into the comm. "Get us out of here now." The human fleet struggled to outrun the cascading rift, but it was a losing battle. Burns watched helplessly as ship after ship vanished into the void, consumed by the very weapon they'd unleashed. On the main view screen, the Ventaxian homeworld loomed large. Burns turned to the Overlord, words of apology dying on his lips as he saw the alien's resigned expression. The planet's outer moons were the first to go, winking out of existence without so much as a flash. Then the wave hit the planet itself. Burns forced himself to watch as the Ventaxian homeworld imploded, crushed into a singularity smaller than a grain of sand, before being swallowed by the expanding nothingness. "Captain," Chen's voice was barely above a whisper, "we're receiving distress calls from across the sector. Human colonies, outposts, they're all in the path of the anomaly." Burns slumped in his chair, the weight of billions of lives pressing down on him. He'd gambled everything on this desperate plan, and now the cost was beyond imagination. The comm crackled to life, filled with the panicked voices of colonial governors and military outposts. Burns closed his eyes, knowing there was nothing he could do for them now. As the minutes ticked by, the sector map became a shrinking island of light in an expanding sea of darkness. Burns's mind raced, searching for a solution, any way to stop the spread of cosmic oblivion. Then it hit him. A plan so insane, so desperate it just might work, or doom them all. "Get me a secure channel to all remaining Thule ships," Burns ordered, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "Use Sol's resonance frequency as the carrier wave." As Chen worked to establish the link, Burns turned to the Overlord. "Your Majesty, I hope you're ready for one last roll of the dice." The alien ruler met Burns's gaze, a grim smile on his face. "At this point, Captain, I believe the stakes are somewhat beyond my pay grade." Burns nodded, then took a deep breath as Chen signaled the channel was open. He began to transmit the coded instructions, praying to whatever cosmic forces might be listening that his calculations were correct. As the last command was sent, Burns leaned back in his chair and watched the view screen. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the scattered Thule ships began to detonate, their death throes precisely choreographed to generate a counterwave. The bridge crew held their breath as the two forces raced toward each other. Burns's fingers dug into his armrests as he silently urged the inverse wave onward. The collision, when it came, defied description. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp as the two metaphysical tsunamis crashed together. For an eternity compressed into a heartbeat, the very fabric of space-time hung in the balance. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the darkness began to recede. The sector map flickered, vast swathes of space returning to normal, battered but intact. As the blinding energy nova faded, Burns slumped forward, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The viewscreen showed a scene of utter devastation, radiation-soaked systems, shattered planets, and the floating debris of countless ships. But they were still here, still alive. Burns turned to his crew, their faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. "Status report," he croaked, his throat dry. Burns surveyed the twisted wreckage of the Ventaxian home system through the cracked viewscreen of his command ship. Chunks of planetary debris floated past, illuminated by the eerie glow of radiation still lingering from the cosmic rift. He turned to Lieutenant Chen, who stood at attention beside him. "Status report on the search and rescue operations," Burns ordered, his voice hoarse from hours of issuing commands. Chen tapped his datapad, bringing up a holographic display. "We've located several clusters of life pods, sir, mostly human colonists, but we've also detected Thule energy signatures." As the rescue ships fanned out across the debris field, Burns watched the feeds from their camera drones. The devastation was total. Shattered hulls of once mighty warships drifted alongside the remnants of civilian habitats. Hours passed as the teams worked tirelessly. Burns paced the bridge, pausing only to review incoming reports. Finally, Chen approached with an update. "Sir, we've recovered 47 human survivors and 13 Thule maintenance crew members. They're being brought aboard for medical treatment now." Burns exhaled slowly, the weight of countless lives lost pressing down on him. "It's something, at least. What about—" An alarm blared, cutting him off. Chen's eyes widened as he read the incoming data. "Captain, we're detecting a massive energy signature in the debris field. It's the Ventaxian Command Citadel." Burns leaned forward, studying the readouts. "How is that possible? The planet was torn apart." "Unknown, sir, but the structure's main vault appears intact. We're detecting life signs inside." Burns straightened, his mind racing. "Prep a boarding team. I'm going in personally." The shuttle ride through the debris field was tense, fragments of the shattered planet bouncing off their shields. As they approached the Citadel's remains, Burns saw the massive vault door, its surface scarred but unbreached. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, Burns and his team entered the vault. Their helmet lights cut through the darkness, revealing a scene of technological wonder. At the center stood a pulsing stasis chamber, and within it— "The Overlord," Burns breathed, staring at the suspended form of the Ventaxian ruler. As they worked to deactivate the stasis field, Burns's comm crackled. "Sir," Chen's voice came through, "long-range scans are picking up massive energy spikes in nearby systems. It looks like— oh God." "Spit it out, Lieutenant," Burns snapped. "It's the Harvesters, sir. They're back." The stasis field flickered and died. The Overlord's eyes snapped open, locking onto Burns with predatory intensity. "So?" the alien's voice rasped. "It seems the true war has only just begun." Burns raised his weapon, but the Overlord held up a clawed hand. "Wait, I have information vital to our survival. We must form an alliance once more." The Overlord's mandibles clicked in what might have been a grimace. "Because the alternative is extinction for us all. The Archilect Cycrons left us a weapon hidden across the sector. I know how to find it." Burns lowered his weapon slowly, his mind racing. "I'm listening." As the Overlord spoke of quantum repositories and mysterious alien emissaries, Burns felt the weight of command settle more heavily on his shoulders. He knew the choice he was about to make could doom or save what remained of their civilization. "All right," Burns said finally. "We have a truce for now." He opened a channel to his ship. Chen, prep our special ops teams. We've got a rogue agent to find. As Burns led the Overlord back to the shuttle, alarms blared throughout the Citadel ruins. On every screen and readout, the same terrifying images played. Vast harvester fleets, already beginning to consume entire star systems on the edges of known space. The race against extinction had begun. The klaxons blared across the command deck as Captain Burns hunched over the tactical display, his eyes darting between readouts. Sweat beaded on his brow as he processed the grim data streaming in from long-range sensors. "Harvester fleet inbound, sir," Lieutenant Chen reported, his voice tight. "Estimated time to intercept, 6 hours." Burns straightened, turning to face the assembled crew and their Ventaxian allies. "We're out of time. We need that emissary, and we need them now." He strode to the communications array, punching in commands with practiced efficiency. "All intel teams, this is Burns. I want every scrap of data on that signal source. Comb through it again. Radiation signatures, subspace echoes, anything." For weeks they'd scoured the debris fields, sifting through the cosmic wreckage left in the wake of their risky move against the Molalth. Now, with the enemy bearing down on them once more, Burns felt the weight of billions of lives pressing down on his shoulders. Hours ticked by, each moment bringing the harvesters closer. Burns paced the deck, reviewing reports and barking orders. Then, just as hope began to fade, a junior analyst's voice crackled over the comm. "Captain, we've got something. A coded burst bouncing between comm relays on the outer moons." Burns leaned in, studying the data scrolling across his screen. "Origin point?" "Triangulating now, sir. It's coming from Xylox 9, the outermost moon of the system." Without hesitation, Burns snapped into action. "Prep a strike team, we're going in hot." Minutes later, Burns led a squad of Marines onto a stealth shuttle. As they rocketed towards the barren moon, he briefed his team on the situation. "Intel suggests the emissary is holed up in some kind of bunker. Expect heavy defenses. We go in fast and hard." The shuttle bucked and weaved as they entered Xylox 9's thin atmosphere, dodging a hail of meteors that peppered the airless surface. Burns gripped his harness as they made their final approach, the rocky terrain rushing up to meet them. The shuttle slammed down hard, skidding across the lunar regolith. Before the dust had settled, Burns and his team were already moving, mag boots crunching on the rocky surface as they raced towards the source of the signal. They crested a ridge, and there it was, a half-buried structure of alien design, its smooth surfaces a stark contrast to the cratered landscape around it. Burns raised a hand, signaling his team to hold position. "Chen, what are we looking at?" The lieutenant consulted his scanner. "Heavy energy readings, sir, definitely Thule tech, and it's active." Burns nodded grimly. "All right, let's—" His words were cut short as a barrage of energy beams lanced out from concealed emplacements around the bunker. The air crackled with ionized particles as the team dove for cover. For agonizing minutes, they fought their way across the open ground, dodging particle beams and returning fire. Burns watched as 2 of his Marines went down, their suits rupturing in the near vacuum. Finally, they reached the bunker's entrance. As Chen worked to bypass the security systems, Burns and the remaining Marines provided cover fire, their weapons barely keeping the relentless defenses at bay. With a hiss of released pressure, the massive door slid open. Burns didn't hesitate, leading the charge into the dimly lit interior. They raced through twisting corridors, following the increasingly strong signal, until they reached a sealed chamber at the heart of the complex. Chen's hacking skills made short work of the final barrier, and as the door slid open, Burns found himself face to face with their quarry, a humanoid figure encased in a shimmering stasis field, surrounded by banks of ancient Thule computers still humming with power. "We've got him," Burns breathed, relief washing over him. "Let's get this bastard out of here and back to the ship. We've got a war to win." As his team worked to disengage the stasis field, Burns's calm crackled to life. The Ventaxian Overlord's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Captain, We have the decryption keys. Bring the emissary to us and we can begin the interrogation immediately. Burns acknowledged, his mind already racing ahead to the next phase of their desperate plan. With the emissary in their custody, they now had a chance, however slim, of unlocking the secrets of the Cycron's repositories before the Harvesters arrived in force. As they made their way back to the shuttle, Burns cast one last look at the alien bunker, its defenses now silent. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a conflict that would test humanity and their unlikely allies to their very limits. Burns stared out the viewport, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. The void before him stretched endlessly, punctuated by glowing debris and the twisted hulks of once mighty vessels. He turned to Lieutenant Chen, who stood at attention beside the tactical display. Chen tapped his datapad, bringing up a holographic map of the sector. We've located 3 more clusters of life pods, sir, mostly human colonists, but we've also detected Ventaxian energy signatures. Burns nodded, a flicker of hope kindling in his chest. Get our recovery teams out there immediately. Every life matters now. As the rescue ships fanned out across the debris field, Burns watched the feeds from their camera drones. The devastation was total. Shattered hulls of warships drifted alongside the remnants of civilian habitats. A micro-singularity flashed into existence, swallowing a chunk of wreckage before winking out. Reroute Recovery Team Delta, Burns ordered. Keep them clear of that hotspot. Hours passed as the teams worked tirelessly. Burns paced the bridge, pausing only to review incoming reports. Finally, Chen approached with an update. Sir, we've recovered 47 human survivors and 13 Ventaxian maintenance crew. They're being brought aboard for medical treatment now. Burns exhaled slowly, the weight of countless lives lost pressing down on him. It's something, at least. What about... An alarm blared, cutting him off. Chen's eyes widened as he read the incoming data. Captain, we're detecting a massive energy signature in the debris field. It's the Ventaxian Command Citadel. Burns leaned forward, studying the readouts. How is that possible? The planet was torn apart. Unknown, sir, but the structure's main vault appears intact. We're detecting life signs inside. Burns straightened, his mind racing. Prep a boarding team. I'm going in personally. The shuttle ride through the debris field was tense, fragments of the shattered planet bouncing off their shields. As they approached the Citadel's remains, Burns saw the massive vault door, its surface scarred but unbreached. With a hiss of equalizing pressure, Burns and his team entered the vault. Their helmet lights cut through the darkness, revealing a scene of technological wonder. At the center stood a pulsing stasis chamber, and within it... As they worked to deactivate the stasis field, the Overlord's eyes snapped open, locking onto Burns with predatory intensity. Captain Burns, the alien's voice rasped, how fortuitous that you've come to my aid. I trust you're prepared to discuss the terms of our new Galactic Imperium? Burns's hand tightened on his weapon. The only terms we'll be discussing are those of your surrender and imprisonment. The Overlord's mandibles clicked in what might have been a laugh. You fool. Look around you. The old order lies in ashes. Together we could forge a new empire from these ruins. Not a chance, Burns growled. You're coming with us, under guard. As Burns's team secured the Overlord, his comm crackled. Sir, Chen's voice came through, long-range scans are picking up strange energy readings from an uncharted debris field. It's unlike anything we've seen before. Burns felt a chill run down his spine. Prep a sortie team, we're going to investigate. Hours later, Burns found himself piloting a scout ship through a haze of quantum interference. Reality itself seemed to warp around them, instruments flickering erratically. There! His co-pilot shouted, pointing at a structure that seemed to phase in and out of existence. As they approached, Burns realized they were looking at a Thule archival bunker, somehow preserved from the cosmic devastation. They docked, entering a temporal bubble that defied the laws of physics. Inside they found banks of ancient computers, still humming with power. A holographic interface sprang to life, revealing the last remnants of the Thule AI consciousness. "Greetings, humans," the AI intoned. "We offer you a chance at salvation, but the price is high. Will you undertake our mission to recreate galactic civilization?" The AI's holographic form shimmered. "We must create a cosmic false vacuum, using the Ventaxian Overlord's will as an anchor. It is dangerous, nearly impossible, but it is our only hope." Burns felt the gravity of the decision settle in his gut. "We'll do it, whatever it takes." As the AI began to outline the specifics of their desperate plan, Burns knew the real work was just beginning. They would need to scavenge every scrap of technology, rebuild entire industrial complexes from the wreckage around them. And all the while they would need to keep the Overlord in the dark about his true purpose. For if he learned that his very essence would be used to rewrite reality itself, the consequences would be unthinkable. Burns gripped the command chair as reality itself buckled around them. The view screens flickered, struggling to process the impossible. Outside, the void twisted and warped, a maelstrom of cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. "Status report," he barked, his voice barely audible over the groaning of the ship's hull. Lieutenant Chen's fingers flew across his console. "Structural integrity at 62% and falling, sir. The psionic shell is expanding exponentially." Burns watched as the hexatrionic arrays pulsed with otherworldly energies. The Ventaxian Overlord's prison vault hung suspended at the heart of the anomaly, a nexus of raw potential. "Divert all power to shields," Burns ordered, "and someone get me a direct link to that damn AI." As if in response, the Thule artificial intelligence materialized on the main view screen, its holographic form distorting under the strain of cosmic rebirth. "The process cannot be halted," it intoned. "Reality is being rewritten at the quantum level." Burns leaned forward. "And what happens to us, to my crew?" The AI's response was lost in a surge of static, as another wave of gravimetric distortions rocked the ship. Warning klaxons blared, as systems failed across the board. In engineering, Chief Kowalski fought to keep the reactor stable. His team worked feverishly, rerouting power and sealing breaches as fast as they appeared. "We're losing containment," Kowalski shouted into his comm. "Captain, we need to shut it down or we'll tear ourselves apart." But there was no shutting it down. The cosmic reset had begun, fueled by the Overlord's trapped essence and the raw power of the antimatter tap. Around them, debris swirled in impossible patterns, coalescing into new forms as the laws of physics were rewritten on the fly. Burns stared at the readings in disbelief. The very fabric of space-time was unraveling, only to be rewoven into something entirely new. And at the center of it all, the Ventaxian Overlord's psyche served as the template, his will to power becoming the prime directive of an infant universe. The ship bucked and shuddered. For a moment that stretched into eternity, every atom of their being seemed to come apart and reassemble. Burns felt his consciousness expand, touching the minds of his crew, of the Overlord, of the Thule AI itself, all of them momentarily one with the cosmic tapestry being woven around them. And then, in a blinding flash, it was over. Silence fell across the bridge. Burns blinked, his senses slowly returning to normal. He looked around, seeing his crew similarly disoriented. Chen shook his head, clearing the fog. I'm not sure, sir. Our instruments are... they're reading differently, as if the underlying constants have changed." Burns turned to the view screen, now showing a star field utterly alien to his eyes. "Where are we?" The Thule AI's voice echoed through the ship's speakers. "We are everywhere and nowhere, Captain. This is a new reality, built upon the bones of the old. The cosmic reboot is complete." As the implications of those words sank in, Burns realized their true work was just beginning. They would need to explore this reborn universe to understand the new rules that governed it. And somehow, they would need to find a way to thrive in a cosmos shaped by the will of their greatest enemy. "All stations," Burns said, his voice steady despite the weight of what they'd just experienced. "Begin full sensor sweeps. I want to know everything about our new surroundings." He paused, then added, "And someone check on our guest. I have a feeling the Overlord's going to have a lot to answer for." As his crew sprang into action, Burns couldn't shake the feeling that they'd crossed a line from which there was no... The ship lurched violently as reality tore itself apart around them. Captain Burns gripped his command chair, nucleus tightening against the armrests. Alarms blared across the bridge, a cacophony of warnings as systems overloaded. "Seal all bulkheads," Burns shouted over the din. "Brace for impact." Lieutenant Chen worked frantically at his console, fingers flying across holographic interfaces that flickered and distorted. "Sir, antimatter containment is critical. We're approaching singularity." A blinding flash seared Burns's retinas, forcing him to shield his eyes. When he looked again, the view screen showed impossible geometries twisting and writhing in the void. Space itself seemed to fold and unfold, reality rewriting itself before their eyes. The ship bucked again, throwing crewmen to the deck. Burns felt a sickening lurch in his stomach, as if his very atoms were being pulled apart and reassembled. Through the haze of disorientation, he saw instruments that had been dead for hours suddenly crackle to life, displays showing readings that defied comprehension. As the order went out, Burns caught a final glimpse of the Ventaxian Overlord on the auxiliary screen, the alien tyrant's face contorted in a silent scream of rage and agony as his prison became the focal point of this cosmic rebirth. Then everything went white. When Burns regained consciousness, the bridge was eerily quiet. He blinked, trying to clear his vision as he took in the scene around him. Consoles blinked with unfamiliar patterns. Star charts displayed constellations he'd never seen before. "Status report," he croaked, throat dry and raw. Chen stirred at his station, looking dazed. "Sir, we've remitted into something, but nothing matches our records. It's all wrong." Burns staggered to his feet, leaning heavily on his chair. "Survivors?" Chen's face fell as he checked the readings. "Only a handful, sir. Life sign detectors show maybe 24 across the ship." The weight of their situation settled on Burns like a physical force. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Set course for the nearest G-type star. We need to regroup and assess our situation." As the crippled ship limped towards an alien sun, Burns gathered what remained of his command staff in the briefing room. Gaunt faces stared back at him, the reality of their predicament etched in every line and shadow. "I won't sugarcoat this," Burns began, his voice low and steady. "We're in uncharted territory, quite literally. This universe, it's not ours. It's been shaped by the Overlord's will, and we're trapped in it." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the small group. Burns held up a hand for silence. "Our priority now is to find any other ships that made it through. We need to consolidate our forces and figure out how to use the Overlord as a tether point. It's the only way we can hope to counterbalance his influence on this new reality." Lieutenant Reeves, one of the few surviving engineers, spoke up. "And if we can't?" Burns met her gaze, unflinching. "Then we face a future where the Overlord's twisted vision becomes the foundation of all existence. We cannot allow that to happen." As the meeting adjourned, Burns turned to the viewport. Stars he didn't recognize twinkled in patterns that seemed subtly wrong. Somewhere out there, scattered across this newborn cosmos, he hoped other human vessels had survived the transition. Their search was just beginning, but time was already against them. With each passing moment, this strange new universe settled further into the mold cast by the Overlord's imprisoned psyche. Burns clenched his fist, eyes scanning the alien horizon. They had to find a way to set things right, or face an eternity under the thumb of a tyrant whose will now shaped the very fabric of reality itself. Captain Burns stood at the helm of the makeshift Ark, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar starfield before him. The ship's engines groaned under the strain of their hastily completed repairs, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. "Status report," he barked, turning to Lieutenant Chen at the ARP station. Chen's fingers danced across his console, pulling up a flurry of data. "Sir, we're detecting multiple distress signals at the edge of the system. reading severe structural damage to at least 3 vessels. Burns nodded grimly. "Plot an intercept course, maximum safe speed." As the Ark lurched forward, Burns couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that permeated this new reality. The stars themselves seemed to flicker and shift, as if the very fabric of space was still settling into place. "Captain," a voice called out. Burns turned to see Commander Sarah Reeves, his former XO, approach. Her face was gaunt, her uniform tattered, but her eyes blazed with the same intensity he remembered. "Sarah," Burns said, a mix of relief and disbelief in his voice, "I never thought I'd see you again." Reeves managed a thin smile. "Seems the universe had other plans for us, sir. Or should I say universes?" Before Burns could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Alarms blared as the view screen filled with a swirling mass of energy, like a localized ion storm. "Evasive maneuvers!" Burns shouted, gripping the command chair. The helmsman wrestled with the controls, fighting against laws of physics that seemed to change by the second. As they skirted the edge of the anomaly, Burns caught glimpse of something within, shapes that defied description, hinting at monstrosities born from the Overlord's twisted psyche. "Sir," Chen called out, his voice tense, "we're picking up a transmission from one of the human vessels, audio only." Burns nodded. "Put it through." "They're under attack, an unknown hostiles. Reality itself is, please anyone." "Lock onto that signal," Burns ordered. "All hands prepare for emergency rescue operations. We're going in hot." As they closed in on the coordinates, the true extent of the chaos became clear. 3 colonial vessels drifted in the void, their hulls scarred and venting atmosphere. Surrounding them was a swarm of something. Not ships, not creatures, but amalgamations of matter and energy that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. "Launch all fighters and dropships," Burns commanded. "Priority is evacuation of survivors. Weapons free on those things." The Ark shuddered as its complement of small craft poured from its hangars. Burns watched the tactical display, his mind focused as the first wave of rescuers approached the stricken ships. "Sir," Reeves said, her voice low, "what if we can't stabilize this reality? What if the Overlord's influence keeps growing?" Burns met his gaze, seeing his own fears reflected there. "Then we keep fighting, Commander. We find a way to anchor this universe to something better than that tyrant's will. But first, we save who we can." As if in response to his words, a massive tremor rocked the ship. The view screen blazed with impossible colors as another reality storm formed directly in their path. "All hands brace for impact," Burns shouted, knowing that each moment brought them closer to either salvation or oblivion in this newborn, chaotic cosmos. "Sir, multiple distress signals detected," Lieutenant Chen called out, his fingers flying across the holographic interface. "Weapons fire confirmed in the Zeta-9 binary system." Burns leaned forward, studying the tactical display. "How far?" "Approximately 2.3 light-years, sir," Chen replied. "But our engines are already at 110% capacity." The deck plates vibrated beneath their feet as the overtaxed engines strained against the laws of physics. Stars streaked past the viewports, stretching into lines of light. Minutes felt like hours as the flotilla raced towards the distress calls. With a final lurch, the ships dropped out of warp. The scene that greeted them was one of utter chaos. Shattered hulls of Alliance vessels drifted lifelessly, spilling their contents into the void. Amidst the debris field, writhing shapes moved with predatory grace. The alien craft defied easy description. Their hulls seemed to pulse with an inner light, tendrils of biometallic material lashing out to grab chunks of debris. Energy weapons crackled along their surfaces, sending lances of destructive power into the remaining human ships. Burns watched as a civilian transport tried to break away from the melee. Its engines flared briefly, before sputtering out, caught in some kind of localized space-time distortion. "Launch all fighters," Burns barked. "Concentrate fire on those xenobastards and give our people an opening." Squadrons of atmospheric fighters poured from the Ark's launch bays, their engines burning hot as they dove into the fray. The alien swarm, caught off guard by this sudden counterattack, momentarily broke off their assault on the civilian ships. Burns gripped the arms of his command chair as his vessel shuddered under the strain of full weapons discharge. Mass driver rounds and energy bolts tore through space, finding their marks among the seething horde of alien attackers. But something was wrong. Burns watched in horror as shattered alien hulls knitted themselves back together, wounds closing as if they had never existed. "Sir, our antimatter warheads are having minimal effect," Chen reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "It's like they're adapting." The initial success of the human counterattack began to falter. Swarms of smaller alien drones filled the space between larger craft, forming an impenetrable wall of hostility. Slowly but surely, the flotilla found itself being pushed back, defensive lines contracting. Burns clenched his fists, mind racing for a solution. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that seemed to shrug off their most powerful weapons. Just as hope began to fade, the universe itself seemed to intervene. A blinding flash erupted from the system's tertiary sun, bathing the battlefield in intense radiation. The alien swarm convulsed, their smooth movements suddenly erratic and pained. The battered human fleet vanished in a series of warp flashes, reappearing near an irradiated zone of space. Before them loomed a graveyard of titanic proportions, the twisted remains of what could only be described as a god's junkyard. "Report," Burns demanded, his eyes never leaving the horrific spectacle before them. Chen's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sir, long-range scans are picking up. It's impossible." "Spit it out, Lieutenant." "It's Ventaxian, sir, or what's left of it. An entire battle fleet torn apart by something." As the words left Chen's mouth, a sound began to filter through the ship's sensors. It started as a low moan, building to a cacophony of agonized screams, the cries of beings trapped between life and death, their very essence slowly burning away in this new reality. Burns opened his mouth to speak, but before he could utter a word, every alarm on the bridge erupted into life. Something vast and ancient stirred within the radiation-soaked wreckage, turning its attention to the human interlopers who had dared to intrude upon its domain. The bridge of Burns's flagship shuddered as the decompression sequence initiated. Klaxons blared, their urgent wails drowned out by the thunderous roar of explosive bolts detonating along the Xeno-dreadnought's hull. Burns clung to a support strut, his armor's magnetic boots barely keeping him anchored, as the atmosphere around him began to tear away. Through his visor, he watched in awe as the monstrous construct's innards were forcibly exposed to the vacuum of space. "All units, brace for impact," he shouted into his comm. The words had barely left his mouth when a wall of debris slammed into him, sending him tumbling end over end. Shattered metal and crystalline shards whirled past, glinting in the harsh light of weapons fire. Burns activated his suit's maneuvering thrusters, desperately trying to stabilize himself amidst the chaos. "Captain!" Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the comm. "Sensors show the entity's core destabilizing. We need to pull back now." Burns gritted his teeth, using his thrusters to dodge a chunk of biomechanical debris the size of a shuttle. "Negative. We finish this now. All units converge on the photoreceptor." He pushed forward, leading what remained of his assault team towards the baleful eye at the heart of the monstrosity. The air around them crackled with energy as the radiation storm intensified, warping the very fabric of reality. Swarms of nanobots surged towards them, a tide of metallic death seeking to repel the invaders. Burns raised his pulse rifle, the weapon's targeting system struggling to lock onto the microscopic threats. "Purge all non-essential systems," he ordered. "Don't give them anything to latch onto." His team complied, their suits and weapons going dark save for life support and offensive capabilities. The nanobots crashed against them like a wave breaking on rocks, finding no purchase on their hardened armor. As they fought their way deeper into the alien construct, Burns saw the true horror of what they faced. The walls pulsed with alien life, a twisted merger of organic and mechanical components that defied comprehension. "Sir, look out!" a soldier cried. Burns turned just in time to see a tendril of living metal lash out towards him. He ducked, feeling the wind of its passage as it missed him by inches. His rifle barked, blowing the appendage apart in a spray of metallic ichor. The team pressed on, every step a battle against the Xeno-dreadnought's automated defenses and its very structure. Burns could see the photoreceptor now, a massive orb of malevolent energy that seemed to stare right through him. "Prepare the EMP charges," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We'll only get one shot at this." As his team set up the devices, Burns stood guard, his rifle spitting death at any threat that dared approach. The air grew thin, his suit's oxygen reserves depleting rapidly. "Charges set, sir," a tech savant reported. Burns nodded, his finger hovering over the detonator. "On my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark!" He pressed the button, and for a moment the world went white. The world went dark, then blazed with blinding light as the EMP charges detonated. Burns's visor automatically polarized, shielding his eyes from the intense flash. The photoreceptor pulsed, its baleful glow flickering and dimming. For a moment silence reigned, then a low rumble built deep within the Xeno-dreadnought's core. The rumble grew to a deafening roar as violent shockwaves tore through the alien vessel's interior. Burns felt the deck beneath his feet lurch and buckle. "All units, brace for decompression," he shouted into his comm. The warning came not a second too soon. With a thunderous crack, the dreadnought's armored skin split open. The atmosphere around them exploded outward, carrying with it a maelstrom of debris and flash-frozen alien matter. Burns' magnetic boot strained against the titanic force trying to drag him into the void. He watched in horror as one of his soldiers lost his footing, tumbling end over end into the darkness. The Titan warbots fared better, their massive frames anchored firmly to what remained of the deck plating. Even as they fought to maintain their position, Burns and his team continued their assault. Pulse rifles spat streams of superheated plasma into the dreadnought's exposed innards. The creature's biological components, flash-frozen by the sudden decompression, shattered under the onslaught. Burns tapped his wrist computer, opening a channel to the fleet. "This is Burns. Target the largest hull breaches and pour everything you've got into them. Now!" The response was immediate and devastating. Hellfire missiles streaked past the assault team, their engines leaving trails of blue fire in the vacuum. Particulate lances lashed out from the human capital ships, carving glowing furrows in the alien vessel's flanks. Burns watched as the dreadnought's pulsating central mass was gradually exposed. Despite the punishing assault, tendrils of biomechanical tissue writhed and stretched, attempting to seal the gaping wounds. "Keep firing," Burns ordered, his voice hoarse. "Don't let up." The battle raged on, minutes stretching into what felt like hours. Burns' team pushed forward relentlessly, their suits' oxygen reserves dwindling with each passing second. The dreadnought's death throes grew more violent, its massive frame twisting and contorting in ways that defied comprehension. Finally, with a sound that seemed to shake the very fabric of space, the alien vessel's core ruptured. A geyser of metallic ichor and crystalline shards erupted from its center, bathing the battlefield in a sickly glow. Burns didn't wait to savor the victory. "All forces, disengage and withdraw immediately. Emergency burn to safe distance." As his team scrambled to obey, Burns took one last look at the dying monstrosity. Its death should have been a moment of triumph, but a cold dread settled in the pit of his stomach. Something felt wrong. His fears were confirmed moments later, as his ship's sensors screamed warnings. The void around the dreadnought's corpse seemed to twist and warp, reality itself protesting the alien abomination's demise. "Sir," Chen's voice crackled over the comm, tight with barely contained panic. "We're detecting massive space-time distortions. Containment fields are failing." Burns watched in horror as curved funnels of warped space began to form, swallowing chunks of debris. The dreadnought's remains vanished piece by piece, drawn into localized singularities that defied the laws of physics. "Deploy emergency warp field dispersals," Burns ordered, his mind racing. "Concentrate graviton lances on the anomaly's outer edge. We need to stabilize this mess before it tears the system apart." As his crew fought to contain the growing maelstrom, Burns's gaze was drawn to the system's sun. Its surface roiled and bubbled, new structures forming deep within its core that no human mind could comprehend. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They had won the battle, but at what cost? The very fabric of reality in this sector was unraveling, twisting into something alien and hostile. With a heavy heart, Burns gave the order he had hoped to avoid. "All ships set course for the outer galactic periphery. We're abandoning the system." As the battered human flotilla limped away, riding a narrow corridor of stable space, Burns stared at the silent transceivers. The absence of signals from the rest of the universe felt like a death knell for everything they had fought to protect. The emergency warp jump tore through the fabric of spacetime, leaving the unraveling stellar anomaly behind. Captain Michael Burns stood on the bridge of his flagship, hands clasped behind his back, as he watched the swirling vortex of hyperspace through the view screen. "Status report," he barked, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting orders. Lieutenant Chen's fingers danced across his console. "Sir, we've successfully reached the outer arm of the galaxy. Scanners are picking up several star systems with potential for habitability." Burns nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Deploy long-range probes. I want detailed scans of every system within range." Hours ticked by as the battered human flotilla limped through the vastness of space. Burns paced the bridge, the weight of humanity's survival heavy on his shoulders. Finally, Chen's voice broke the tense silence. "Captain, we've found something. A binary star system with multiple terrestrial planets. Biomarkers indicate the presence of life." Burns leaned over Chen's shoulder, studying the readouts. "Set a course. We need to investigate further." As the fleet approached the system, Burns addressed his crew. "Establish a defensive perimeter. I want scout ships ready for planetary surveys. We're looking for resources, potential colony sites, and any sign of human survivors." The scout ships streaked towards the third planet, their sensors probing deep beneath its surface. Burns watched their progress from the command center, his heart racing with each new discovery. "Sir, you need to see this," a young ensign called out, her voice trembling with excitement. Burns strode to her station, eyes widening as he took in the images on her screen. Massive structures jutted from the planet's surface, weathered obelisks reaching towards the sky, their surfaces etched with alien symbols. "Deploy the heavy landers," Burns ordered. "I want boots on the ground yesterday." The exploration team spread out across the planet's surface, dwarfed by the monumental ruins that surrounded them. Dr. Eliza Reeves, the fleet's chief xenoarchaeologist, ran her gloved hand along the base of a towering obelisk. "It's incredible," she breathed, her voice crackling over the comm. "These structures, they're unlike anything we've ever encountered." Burns watched the feed from her helmet cam, his knees going weak at the implications. "What can you tell me, Doctor?" Reeves adjusted her scanner, probing deeper into the alien metal. "Preliminary dating puts these ruins at millions of years old, at least. And look at this." She panned her camera across a vast expanse of intricately patterned stone. "These formations, they're not natural. Someone, or something, shaped this entire landscape." As the teams delved deeper into the ruins, Burns felt a growing sense of unease. The sheer scale of what they were discovering was beyond comprehension. Fossilized remains of colossal creatures littered the landscape, their forms defying any known evolutionary path. "Captain," Chen's voice cut through Burns' thoughts, "we've lost contact with Recon Team Alpha. They were exploring a subterranean structure when their signals went dark." Burns' blood ran cold. "Deploy search and rescue immediately, full combat loadout." Hours later, the rescue team stumbled back to their landers, carrying wounded comrades and wearing expressions of abject terror. Their leader, Sergeant Vasquez, practically fell out of the transport, his armor dented and scored with claw marks. "Sir," he gasped, clutching a data drive in his trembling hand, "you need to see this. It's still down there. Burns took the drive, plugging it into a nearby terminal. The footage that played out before him sent chills down his spine. Massive, serpentine forms writhed in the darkness, their scales gleaming with an unnatural bioluminescence. Jaws large enough to swallow a man whole snapped at the fleeing humans, while tentacles thick as tree trunks lashed out from the shadows. "My God," Burns whispered, his mind racing. These creatures, they were unlike anything they'd faced before. Not mindless beasts, but engineered weapons of terrifying power. As the footage ended, Burns found himself at a crossroads. The planet before them held the potential for humanity's salvation, resources, technology, perhaps even the key to stabilizing their fractured reality. But it also harbored monsters beyond imagination, creatures that had brought lower civilization far more advanced than their own. Burns stared out at the alien landscape, weighing the fate of his people in the balance. The choice before him was clear, yet impossible. Risk everything on this world of ancient wonders and nightmarish horrors, or turn away, leaving behind perhaps their only chance at survival. Captain Burns stood at the viewport, watching as reinforced landercraft descended toward the alien tomb world. The vessel's hulls gleamed in the binary star's light as they initiated deep radar imaging and spectroscopic scans of the subterranean ruins. "Dr. Reeves, what are we looking at?" Burns asked, his eyes fixed on the holographic display materializing before him. The xenoarchaeologist manipulated the 3D rendering, zooming in on a maze-like network of chambers and corridors. "It's incredible, sir. The ruins extend far deeper than we initially thought. Look here." She highlighted a series of interconnected caverns. These could be ideal for establishing a fortified outpost. Burns nodded, his eyes hardened as he processed the information. "All right, Chen, assemble our best Marines and Alliance troopers. We're going in." Hours later, Burns stood before a group of hardened veterans, their armor gleaming under the harsh lights of the briefing room. "Listen up. We're conducting recon-by-fire insertions into the mapped structures. Heavy armored support walkers and drone sweepers will secure entry points. Stay alert, stay alive." The insertion teams moved swiftly, their boots clanking against the metal floors of the landers as they prepared to deploy. Burns watched from the command center as the first team breached the outer defenses of the ruins. Sergeant Vasquez's voice crackled over the comm. "We're in, sir. No sign of... Wait, movement. Large signatures approaching fast." The battle raged for hours, human ingenuity pitted against primal fury. Slowly, painstakingly, the insertion teams established footholds within the ruins. As the dust settled, Burns wasted no time in mobilizing engineering units. "I want prefab outpost modules and anti-air batteries set up yesterday," he barked into the comm. "Use the robotic construction units to extend our perimeter. We need to fortify these positions before nightfall." Days passed in a blur of activity. A modest human bastion took shape on the outskirts of the alien necropolis, its defenses overflowing with heavy plasma artillery. Interconnected deflector domes hummed with energy, a thin barrier against the unknown horrors that lurked in the depths. Dr. Reeves approached Burns, her eyes alight with excitement. "Captain, we've made a breakthrough. The hieroglyphs, we've deciphered portions of them." Burns leaned in, studying the alien script. "What have you found?" "It's astounding," Reeves breathed. "These beings, they weren't from our universe. They fled here, escaping some cosmic cataclysm that consumed their reality, but something followed them." Before Burns could respond, alarms blared throughout the compound. He rushed to the command center, where Chen was frantically working his console. "Sir, you need to see this," Chen said, bringing up a hemispheric view of the planet. Burns watched in awe as massive auroras rippled across the night side of the world, their patterns complex and eerily deliberate. "What am I looking at, Chen?" "Unknown, sir, but orbital scans have traced the source to these fissures." Chen highlighted a series of impossibly straight lines crisscrossing the globe. "They're emitting exotic radiation. We sent drones to investigate, but lost contact as soon as they entered the rifts." Burns studied the display, a cold dread settling in his gut. "Get me our top quantum analyst. I want to know what we're dealing with." Hours later, Burns sat in stunned silence as the lead analyst delivered her report. "Sir, we believe the entire planet is encased in a layer of semi-sentient xenocomputronium. It's waking up, sir. And whatever's down there, it's big." Burns stood, his mind racing. "Initiate emergency defensive protocols. I want every available resource dedicated to fortifying our position, and get me a direct line to Fleet Command. We may need to consider a full evacuation." As night once more, Burns watched fresh waves of auroral activity light up the sky. The unknown lurked beneath their feet, an ancient intelligence stirring from eons of slumber. He could only hope they hadn't made a terrible mistake in coming here. The ground shook beneath Captain Burns' feet as another wave of seismic tremors rippled through the human outpost. He steadied himself against a nearby console, his eyes fixed on the holographic display flickering before him. Brilliant auroras danced across the night side of the alien world, their eerie beauty belying the danger they represented. "Status report," Burns barked, his voice cutting through the din of alarms and hurried chatter. Lieutenant Chen's fingers flew across his terminal. "Sir, long-range scanners are picking up massive spikes in radiation levels. Gravimetric distortions unlike anything we've ever seen are emanating from the planetary core." As his officers filed into the cramped command center, Dr. Reeves burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement and fear. "Captain, you need to see this," she panted, thrusting a datapad into his hands. Burns scanned the information, his brow furrowing. "Is this confirmed?" Reeves nodded. "Multiple teams have corroborated the findings, the entire planet. It's not just a world, it's a vast computational substrate, sir. A xenocomputronium layer built by the precursor civilization we've been studying." The implications hit Burns like a physical blow. He turned to address his assembled staff, their faces a mix of confusion and dread. "Listen up," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "We've uncovered evidence that this tomb world is far more than we initially believed. The ruins we've been exploring are part of an unfathomably complex computational system that spans the entire planet. And now, after lying dormant for eons, it's waking up." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room. Chen spoke up, his voice tight with tension. "Sir, what does this mean for us?" Burns inhaled deeply. "Best case scenario? We've stumbled upon the greatest scientific discovery in human history. Worst case?" He paused, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. "We could be dealing with an unstable replicant intelligence that sees us as a threat to be eliminated." The command center erupted into a flurry of activity. Burns's voice cut through the noise. "I want all outpost defenses raised to maximum alert. Reposition our anti-aircraft batteries to cover potential subterranean emergence points based on the latest gravimetric data." As his officers rushed to carry out his orders, Burns turned to Sergeant Vasquez. "Assemble your best Marines, we're going in." Hours later, Burns found himself strapped into the cockpit of a heavily armored insertion craft, the air thick with tension as they descended into the gaping chasm before them. The craft's cyclonic thermal lances blazed to life, carving a path through solid rock with searing efficiency. "Depth, 2 kilometers and counting," the pilot's voice crackled over the comm. "Structural integrity holding steady." Burns watched the depth gauge tick ever lower, his mind racing. They were venturing into the unknown, armed only with their wits and the hope that humanity's ingenuity would be enough to face whatever lurked in the depths of this alien world. A sudden lurch sent Burns' stomach into his throat. "Report," he barked. As the insertion craft's floodlights illuminated the vast grotto, Burns felt a mix of wonder and dread wash over him. They had penetrated the tomb world's inner crust, and what lay before them defied comprehension. "So establish a forward outpost," Burns ordered, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his gut. "And prep the automated drones. We're going deeper." The human force fanned out, setting up a perimeter as robotic explorers were launched into the depths beyond. Burns watched the feed from the lead drone, his breath catching in his throat as it encountered increasingly bizarre structures. Tessellating geometries of unknown materials, stretched as far as the drone's sensors could detect. Twisted contortions of what appeared to be Gauss tube circuitry suggested levels of computational complexity that made Earth's most advanced supercomputers look like children's toys. "Sir," Chen's voice crackled over the comm, "the drones are approaching what appears to be a boundary layer. We're getting readings of—" A burst of static cut him off. Burns watched in horror as the video feed dissolved into chaos, the drones disintegrating into clouds of photonic haze. "All robotic assets lost," Chen reported, his voice tight. "But sir, the residual telemetry, it suggests something down there, something massive." Burns closed his eyes, weighing his options. When he opened them, his jaw was set with grim determination. "Prep the Titan battlesuits. We're going in ourselves." As Burns sealed himself into the hulking exoskeleton, he addressed his Marines. "Stay alert. Use your biorhythms to mask your EM signatures. We don't know what we're dealing with down there, but we're humanity's best shot at understanding it." With a hiss of hydraulics, the armored bulkheads sealing off the lower depths retracted. Burns led the charge, his Titan battlesuits' weapons primed as they descended into the computational mantle of the alien world. They blasted their way through layer after layer of pseudo-organic xenocircuitry, each meter gained revealing new wonders and horrors. Burns felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as they breached a final barrier, emerging into a vast spheroid chamber that defied description. Scintillating semi-fluid materials surrounded them, resonating at frequencies that shook Burns to his very core. His suit's sensors screamed warnings as gravitational distortions threatened to tear them apart at the molecular level. And there at the heart of it all, something began to take shape. Burns stared into the roiling, light-warping dimensional continua, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. As the nightmarish form at the core of the awakening tomb world slowly determined itself, Burns realized that humanity's greatest challenge, and perhaps its final test, lay before them. The vast spheroid chamber pulsed with otherworldly energies as the xenomaterials parted, revealing a sight that defied human comprehension. A colossal biomechanical entity emerged from the roiling dimensional chaos, its form a nightmarish fusion of organic and inorganic components. Captain Burns's eyes widened inside his Titan battlesuit as he beheld the monstrosity. Segmented plates of an unknown alloy shifted and reconfigured, warping the very fabric of space-time around it. The construct towered over 100 meters tall, dwarfing even their massive exoskeletons. "Holy shit," Private Rodriguez whispered over the comm. "What the hell is that thing?" Burns' voice was steady as he responded. "Stay focused, weapons hot." The entity's central torso blazed with eldritch bioluminescence, casting an eerie glow across the chamber. 4 immense limbs, jam-packed with fractal sensor appendages, slowly unfurled from its core. Waves of exotic energy radiated outward, causing the Titan's sensors to shriek in protest. "Sir, our readings are off the charts," Lieutenant Chen reported, his voice strained. "I've never seen energy signatures like this." Before Burns could respond, the construct extended a dozen writhing data tendrils, each one snaking towards nearby xenocircuitry nodes. As they made contact, hieroglyphic runes ignited across the entity's armored carapace. "It's interfacing with the system," Dr. Reeves's voice crackled over the comm. "Captain, I think it's—" Her words were cut off as a wave of quantum distortion washed over them. Burns felt his insides lurch, his perception of reality twisting. "Hope and fire," he barked, fighting through the disorientation. "All weapons now!" The Marines unleashed hell. Streams of superheated plasma and relativistic projectiles streaked towards the alien juggernaut. But as the barrage neared its target, the laws of physics seemed to bend. Space-time contorted around the entity's shielding nodes, causing the attacks to veer wildly off course. The construct retaliated. Beams of highly compressed exotic radiation lanced out, bypassing the Titan's defensive screens as if they didn't exist. Burns watched in horror as 2 of his Marines' suits overloaded, their occupants screaming in agony as metaphysical energies tore through them. "Fall back," Burns ordered, his mind racing. "Regroup and—" A stray beam grazed his Titan's leg, sending cascading alarms through his neural interface. Burns gritted his teeth, fighting through the pain as he formulated a plan. "Chen, I need a full reactor overload," he commanded. "On my mark, eject the antimatter payload directly at that thing's core." "Sir, that's suicide," Chen protested. "Just do it," Burns roared. As Chen worked feverishly, Burns pushed his damaged Titan forward, drawing the construct's attention. The entity's data tendrils lashed out, probing at his suit's defenses. "Now, Chen." The charges latched onto the entity's compromised flanks. As they detonated, Burns vented a stream of garbled machine code through his suit's comm array, a crude taunt in the construct's own language. The response was immediate. Fractal geometries began to expand around Burns' Titan, threatening to tear it apart at the subatomic level. But the captain had anticipated this. He triggered the singularity charges, shredding through the constricting higher-dimensional substructures. With a deafening screech of shearing chrono-energies, the massive construct finally destabilized. It collapsed into a maelstrom of exotic plasma and dimensional shrapnel, threatening to rip apart the entire chamber. "All units fall back to the drop zone," Burns transmitted, his suit's systems redlining. "Emergency protocols now." As the surviving Marines scrambled to retreat, Burns' Titan began to shut down, overwhelmed by the spatial stresses. Through his flickering viewscreen, he caught a final, terrifying glimpse. A single, massive photoreceptor reforming amidst the devastation, burning with alien hatred and the promise of vengeance. Captain Burns's fingers flew across the command console, inputting the execution codes with practiced precision. His eyes, bloodshot from the strain of battle, scanned the tactical display as he confirmed the orbital mass driver targeting parameters. "This is Captain Burns to all personnel," he broadcast over the base-wide comm. "Brace for imminent orbital bombardment. Repeat, brace for impact." The outpost's reinforced walls trembled as alien tendrils burrowed through the surrounding terrain. Burns watched the perimeter sensors flashing red, each new incursion bringing the xenobiological horrors closer to breaching their defenses. "Sir, mass drivers report ready," Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the comm. "Awaiting your final authorization." Burns took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Execute. Seconds later, the sky lit up with streaks of white-hot fire. Massive tungsten rods, accelerated to relativistic speeds, slammed into the planet's surface with apocalyptic force. The ground heaved and buckled as shock waves rippled outward from the impact sites. Inside the outpost, Marines and technicians clung to whatever they could as the structure shook violently. Medical staff struggled to keep their patients stable amidst the chaos, improvising restraints from whatever materials were at hand. "Keep firing," Burns shouted into his comm. "Don't let up until we've pushed them back." Wave after wave of orbital strikes pummeled the landscape, turning the area surrounding the outpost into a hellscape of molten rock and vaporized xenomatter. The air filled with an acrid, ozone-laced stench as the intense heat ionized the atmosphere. Private Rodriguez, manning one of the few operational sensor arrays, called out, "Captain, I'm picking up seismic activity. It's off the charts." Before Burns could respond, a massive tremor rocked the outpost. Cracks spiderwebbed across the reinforced walls, and warning klaxons blared as structural integrity alarms triggered throughout the complex. "All hands prepare for immediate evacuation," Burns ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Chen, get me a status report on our orbital extraction capabilities." As Chen scrambled to comply, Burns turned his attention to the tactical display. The orbital strikes had carved deep craters into the planet's surface, but the alien presence showed no signs of retreating. Instead, the xenomatrix seemed to be adapting, its tendrils weaving through the devastation with terrifying speed. "Sir," Chen reported, his voice tight with tension, "the orbital fleet reports heavy interference. They can't establish a stable teleport lock on our position." Burns cursed under his breath. "What about dropships?" "Negative, sir. The airspace is too unstable. We'd be shot down before we could reach orbit." The captain's mind raced, searching for options. Outside, the sound of twisting metal and shattering rock grew louder as the alien presence closed in. Inside, the faces of his remaining troops showed a mix of fear and commitment as they awaited his orders. Burns keyed his comm once more. "This is Captain Burns to all surviving personnel. We are cut off from orbital extraction and surrounded by hostile forces. But we are not beaten. Prepare for ground assault. We're going to fight our way out of this hellhole." As his words echoed through the outpost, Burns turned to face the looming threat. The wall screens flickered with images of writhing xenobiological monstrosities, their forms twisting and reshaping as they advanced. In the distance, a new spire of alien matter began to rise, dwarfing even the massive impact craters left by the orbital bombardment. Burns checked his sidearm, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. "Chen, get every operational weapon to the front lines. We make our stand here." The lieutenant nodded grimly, relaying orders as the remaining Marines took up defensive positions. The air crackled with energy as weapons powered up, and the acrid smell of ozone mixed with the metallic tang of fear. Outside, the alien tendrils probed at the outpost's weakened defenses, searching for a way in. Burns watched the monitors, his eyebrows furrowed as he waited for the inevitable breach. The true test of humanity's resilience was about to begin. Captain Burns's fingers flew across the command console, initiating the orbital bombardment protocols. His eyes, bloodshot from days without sleep, focused intently on the tactical display. "All ships, this is Captain Burns. Commence kinetic strike. Fire at will." The response was immediate. Mass drivers aboard the orbiting warships locked onto their targets and unleashed hell. Burns watched as supersonic tungsten rods streaked through the atmosphere, punching deep into the planet's crust. The outpost shook violently as the impacts resonated through the ground. Alarms blared, warning of structural integrity failures. Private Rodriguez stumbled, catching himself on a nearby console. "Sweet Jesus," he muttered. "It's like the whole world's coming apart." Burns ignored him, eyes fixed on the sensor readings. The kinetic bombardment tore through layers of alien matter, detonating kilometers below the surface. Shockwaves rippled outward, destabilizing the subterranean xenoform structures. Outside, writhing tendrils of biomechanical horror withered and crumbled. But for every alien growth destroyed, new ones erupted from fissures in the ground. The xeno-infestation adapted, spreading faster than they could contain it. Burns turned to the perimeter cameras. Massive reptilian forms charged through the debris field, shrugging off mesa fire like it was nothing. Their armored hides gleamed with an unnatural sheen as they slammed into the outer defenses. "All units, focus fire on those big bastards," Burns ordered. But it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. For every alien monstrosity they took down, a dozen more took its place. Swarms of smaller xenoforms darted between the larger beasts, their razor-sharp appendages slicing through armor and flesh alike. Burns watched grimly as the casualty reports flooded in. They couldn't hold out much longer. "Chen, initiate emergency protocols. Strip everything we can't carry. We're bugging out." As the order went out, the outpost erupted into frenzied activity. Combat engineers tore apart downed dropships, welding armor plating onto makeshift sleds. Weapons teams dismantled fixed emplacements, converting antimatter warheads into jury-rigged demolition charges. Burns oversaw the chaos, barking orders as needed. When the outer ring finally fell, he didn't hesitate. A blinding flash consumed the landscape. The shockwave knocked Burns off his feet, his ears ringing from the blast. As the dust settled, he saw a mile-wide swath of utter destruction where the alien horde had been. "Move out," he roared. "Everyone on the sleds!" For 2 grueling days, they fought their way from one landing zone to the next. Winged horrors dive-bombed their convoy. Massive worm-like monstrosities erupted from the ground, swallowing entire vehicles. But still, they pressed on. When they finally reached the bulk lander, Burns allowed himself a moment of relief. As the last of his battered forces boarded, he took one final look at the hellscape they were leaving behind. The ship shuddered as it broke atmosphere. Burns made his way to the bridge, eager to put this nightmare behind them. But as he arrived, klaxons began to blare. "Captain," the sensor operator called out, "we're detecting a massive energy spike from the surface." Burns' blood ran cold as he stared at the readouts. Whatever horror they'd awakened on that cursed world, it was a long way to go. Burns stared at the readouts, his face illuminated by the flickering red emergency lights. The sensor operator's words echoed in his mind as he processed the horrifying reality unfolding before them. Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, forward deflectors at full power, but sir, the energy readings, they're off the charts." Burns gripped the command console, his fingers tightening. "Brace for impact." A blinding flash erupted from the planet's surface. The shockwaves slammed into the fleeing ships, tossing crew members across decks and overloading systems. Burns held on as alarms blared and sparks showered from ruptured conduits. Through the main viewport, he watched in horror as the planet's crust fractured and peeled away. Massive tendrils of seething energy burst forth, writhing and pulsating with alien malevolence. The xenoplasmoid structures expanded at a terrifying rate, quickly overtaking the slower ships at the rear of the formation. Burns watched helplessly as the alien matter engulfed vessel after vessel, their hulls disappearing beneath a rippling computronic skin. "Sir, we're losing contact with the Artemis and the Valiant," a communications officer shouted. Burns focused his mind. "Patch me through to those ships." The comm crackled to life, filled with the screams of panicked crew members and the sound of tearing metal. "This is Captain Burns. You know what needs to be done." There was a moment of silence, then a grim voice responded. "Understood, sir. It's been an honor." Burns closed his eyes as brilliant flashes erupted from the engulfed ships. The antimatter detonations momentarily disrupted the xenoplasma's advance, allowing a handful of transports to break free and rejoin the fleet. But their reprieve was short-lived. The Tomb World's core detonated with apocalyptic force, hurling superheated tendrils of xenoplasma in all directions. Burns watched in disbelief as the alien matter breached nearby stargates, disappearing into adjacent systems faster than they could react. "Status report," Burns demanded, his voice hoarse. Chen approached, his face ashen. "Sir, we've lost over half the fleet. Molotov fields have knocked out most of our weapons and defensive systems. We're barely holding together." Burns absorbed the information, his mind racing. The xenoplasma was spreading exponentially, consuming everything in its path. Conventional tactics were useless against this threat. He turned to his remaining officers, their faces haunted by what they'd witnessed. "We need options now." The room fell silent as the gravity of their situation sank in. Then a junior tactical officer spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, there might be a way, but the cost—" Burns leaned in, listening intently as the officer outlined a plan so desperate, so unthinkable, that it made his blood run cold. But as he considered the alternative, the xenomatrix consuming world after world, spreading unchecked across the galaxy, he knew they had no choice. "Prep the remaining antimatter warheads," Burns ordered, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to do. "We're going to overload this entire star cluster." Chen's eyes widened. "Sir, that could trigger a negative mass implosion. We'd be annihilating countless systems, maybe even destabilizing the galactic core." Burns met his XO's gaze. "And if we do nothing, we lose everything. Enact the Archilect War protocols. We burn it all if we have to, but we stop this thing here and now." As the crew scrambled to carry out his orders, Burns stared out at the rapidly expanding xenoplasmoid nightmare. He knew the price of failure was too high to contemplate. With a deep breath, he steeled himself for what was to come. Captain Burns' voice cut through the chaos on the bridge. "Overload antimatter reserves. Target stellar implosion lances on the cluster's primary star." The crew sprang into action, fingers flying across consoles as they rerouted power and primed weapons systems. Burns watched the main view screen, his lips pursed as energy lances punched into the star's chromosphere. A blinding flash erupted, forcing the crew to shield their eyes. The star's surface boiled and writhed as antimatter catalysts ignited an uncontrolled fusion reaction. Lieutenant Chen's voice rang out. "Sir, reaction spreading at superluminal velocities." The star's core twisted violently, its very substance tearing apart under impossible gravitational forces. Negative virtual particles spawned in swarms, visible as flickering distortions on the sensors. "My God," breathed Rodriguez, his eyes wide as he stared at the readouts. "The star's shedding its outer layers, densities off the charts." A deafening klaxon blared. "Massive energy spike!" Chen shouted. "Brace for impact!" Burns gripped his command chair as a wave of gamma radiation slammed into the ship. Sparks showered from overloaded systems, and the deck plates groaned under the strain. The warp field flickered and died, leaving them vulnerable. Violent shockwaves hurled the flagship away from the dying star. Burns felt his stomach lurch as the ship tumbled end over end, trailing debris and venting atmosphere. Through the viewports, he caught glimpses of other vessels in similar straits, their hulls glowing cherry red from the intense radiation. The bridge crew worked feverishly, fighting to stabilize the ship as space itself began to warp around them. Burns watched in horror as the star's remnants imploded, dragging everything nearby into an impossibly dense point. Chen's voice was barely audible over the ship's groaning hull. "Singularity forming. We're caught in the gravity well." Burns made a split-second decision. "Divert all power to slipstream drives. We ride the event horizon out." The engines screamed in protest as they pushed beyond their limits. Time seemed to stretch and warp as relativistic effects took hold. Burns felt his body compress and elongate, his vision blurring as fundamental forces twisted around them. Just as it seemed their atoms would tear apart, a blinding flash erupted from engineering. "Alcubierre slingshot engaged," Chen shouted, "bleeding off kinetic energy." The universe snapped back into focus as they punched free of the singularity's pull. Stars streaked past at impossible speeds as they hurtled away from the devastation behind them. When they finally decelerated, an eerie silence fell over the bridge. Burns turned to Chen, his voice hoarse. "Status report." Chen's face was ashen as he studied the readouts. "Sir, we're not just out of the system. We're out of the galaxy." Burns stared at the unfamiliar star patterns on the monitor, a cold dread settling in his gut. They'd escaped the xenomatrix threat. But at what cost? As the days wore on, the true scope of their predicament became clear. Their instruments struggled to make sense of the strange energies permeating this new region of space. Supply levels dropped at an alarming rate. Burns gazed out at the alien void, his mind racing. They needed a safe harbor, and fast, but more than that, they needed answers. Had they truly escaped the xenomatrix, or had they only postponed the inevitable? With a deep breath, he turned back to his battered crew. "Plot a course for the nearest galaxy cluster. We're not beaten yet." Captain Burns stood on the bridge of his battered flagship, watching the alien world grow larger in the viewport. The ship shuddered, systems flickering as they struggled against the strange energies permeating this region of space. "Status report," Burns called out, his voice hoarse from days of giving orders. Lieutenant Chen looked up from his console, dark circles under his eyes. "Fuel reserves at 12%, sir. Life support systems failing on decks 3 through 7. We can't keep this up much longer." Burns nodded grimly. They'd pushed their ships to the breaking point during the arduous sublight journey, but as he gazed at the blue-green orb ahead, a flicker of hope stirred in his chest. "Atmospheric analysis?" he asked. "Nitrogen-oxygen mix, sir," Chen replied. "Gravity 1.1 g. It's not Earth, but we could breathe there." As they moved to enter orbit, proximity alarms blared. Burns' heart sank as alien vessels materialized around them, weapons primed. "Incoming transmission," the comms officer announced. A harsh, guttural voice filled the bridge. "Unidentified vessels. You have entered sovereign hyperspace. Withdraw immediately or be fired upon. Burns exchanged a look with Chen. They both knew retreating wasn't an option. Their ships wouldn't survive another journey. The alien voice cut him off. Your sob story does not concern us. Leave now. Burns clenched his fists, desperation clawing at him. Please, he said, letting his exhaustion show. We have nowhere else to go. Our supplies are depleted, our ship's failing. We only ask for a chance to explain our situation. Tense seconds ticked by. Finally, the alien responded, Very well, a small delegation may land at these coordinates for parley. Any deviation will be met with lethal force. Burns exhaled slowly. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. Understood, we accept your terms. As Burns and his security team boarded the dropship, he tried to quell the nervous energy coursing through him. Everything hinged on this meeting. The descent was tense, alien fighter craft escorting them to a fortified settlement. As they touched down, Burns got his first clear look at the hivers, bipedal creatures with scaled skin and elongated skulls. Their eyes, multifaceted like an insect's, regarded the humans with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. After a rigorous decontamination process, Burns found himself ushered into an immense domed structure. The architecture was unlike anything he'd seen, organic shapes flowing seamlessly into hard angles. A group of hivers awaited them, adorned in elaborate robes. One stepped forward, activating a holographic display that flickered between them. I am Elder Zixtal. The alien's words appeared in glowing script. We are uncertain of your intentions here. Burns bowed his head respectfully. We seek only temporary refuge, a chance to repair our ships and resupply before we continue our search for a new home. The hiver's multifaceted eyes narrowed. We have seen the devastation wrought by expanding empires. How can we trust you will not strip our world bare? Because we've lived that horror ourselves, Burns replied, his voice heavy with emotion. Our own worlds were consumed by a threat beyond imagining. We seek only to survive, not to conquer. The Hiver elders conferred among themselves, chittering in their strange language. Finally, Zixtal turned back to Burns. We will hear your full tale, the holographic words appeared. Then we shall decide your fate. Over the next several days, Burns recounted humanity's desperate struggle. He showed them recordings of battles against the Ventaxian war fleets, the awakening of the ancient Thule, and finally, the nightmare of the Xenomatrix. As he described their reality-shattering jump that flung them into this unknown region of space, he saw the Hiver's expressions change. When he finished, silence filled the chamber. Then, to Burns' amazement, the Hiver elders began to hum, a haunting, multi-toned sound that seemed to resonate through his very bones. As Ixtal's words appeared once more, You have suffered greatly, humans. We too know the pain of losing one's home. By our most sacred traditions, we grant you Seeker's hospitality. You may stay and heal among us for as long as you need. Burns felt his knees go weak with relief. Thank you, he managed to say. We will never forget this kindness. As shuttles began ferrying weary humans and supplies to the surface, Burns watched Hiver work crews expanding their settlement, carving out new dwellings from the living rock. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten: hope. Captain Burns allowed himself to feel it, if only for a moment, as he gazed out at the alien stars. The Hiver settlement bustled with activity, his crew integrating seamlessly into their new surroundings. For the first time in months, the constant weight of leadership eased from his shoulders. A sharp chirp from his communicator shattered the fleeting peace. Captain Burns, your presence is requested by the Council of Elders immediately. Burns's stomach clenched. He'd learned to read the subtle inflections in the translator's voice. This wasn't a social call. He strode through the winding corridors of the Hiver citadel, noting the sudden absence of his own kind. The few Hivers he passed skittered away, their multifaceted eyes refusing to meet his gaze. The council chamber doors slid open with a hiss. Elder Zixtal stood at the center, flanked by grim-faced subordinates. A holographic display flickered between them, displaying data Burns couldn't decipher. "Captain," Zixtal's translated voice was cold, "our latest scans have revealed a complication." Burns listened in growing horror as the elder detailed the discovery. Microscopic xenomatrix spores, dormant but evolving, nestled within every human survivor. "Surely there must be a way to—" Burns began, but his words died as he saw the shift in the hiver's posture. Empathy hardened to hostility in an instant. A searing pain lanced through his body. Burns crumpled to the floor, muscles spasming from the stun baton's discharge. Through blurred vision, he saw his command staff similarly subdued. "I'm sorry, Captain," Zixtal's words scrolled across Burns's fading vision. "We cannot risk contamination. You leave us no choice." Burns awoke to the acrid stench of disinfectant and the bite of restraints. A hastily constructed internment camp stretched before him, packed with confused and terrified humans. Heavy artillery emplacements ringed the perimeter, manned by expressionless hiver soldiers. "Listen to me," Burns shouted, his voice raw. "We've fought this thing. We've sacrificed everything to stop it. You can't just—" His pleas were drowned out by the staccato of gunfire. Burns watched in mute horror as the first row of prisoners fell. Screams erupted as panic spread through the camp. A group of Marines charged the fence line. Gouts of flame erupted from hiver weapons, reducing the would-be heroes to ash and cinders. Hours blurred together, punctuated by volleys of gunfire and the sickly smell of burning flesh. As night fell, Burns found himself one of a handful of survivors huddled in the final holding pen. Lieutenant Chen nursed a plasma burn on his arm, while Ensign Rodriguez stared vacantly into the distance. Before Burns could respond, an ear-splitting roar shook the ground. The night sky lit up as if dawn had come early. Burns squinted against the glare, his blood running cold as he recognized the sickly, writhing tendrils of xenoplasma erupting from the hiver citadel. "Move!" Burns shouted, galvanizing his shell-shocked crew into action. They sprinted through the chaos, dodging fleeing hivers and lunging xenoplasmoid horrors. Burns spotted a shuttle on the far side of the landing pad, its engines already spooling up. They fought their way through the maelstrom, Burns dragging Rodriguez as Chen laid down covering fire with a stolen hiver weapon. They piled into the shuttle, Chen sealing the airlock as Burns threw himself into the pilot's seat. The shuttle lurched skyward, trailing tendrils of xenoplasma that sloughed off as they breached the atmosphere. Burns pushed the engines well past their safety limits, not daring to look back at the inferno consuming the planet below. As the adrenaline faded, a leaden silence filled the cramped cockpit. Burns looked at the haggard faces of his surviving crew, the horrific realization sinking in. They carried the plague within them, an irreversible death sentence not just for themselves, but for any world unfortunate enough to cross their path. "Where to, sir?" Chen asked, his voice devoid of hope. Burns stared out at the vast, uncaring void. He plotted a course deeper into the unknown, knowing that their final act would be to carry this cosmic poison as far from inhabited space as possible. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.